Chapter 428. I can feel it! Has it finally come into being? In two different places in this world, two dignified figures who looked like Buddha stopped what they were doing at the same time and stared at the direction of Chongyang Mountain, as if there was some kind of rare treasure hidden there. Ahem, it's been more than 20 days. Have those little guys finally gained something? An old man with a wrinkled face said to himself, Zetian, even though countless people suspect that you're hiding the Emperor's sword, I still don't believe it. I think someone as great as you wouldn't disregard the survival of the human race. I didn't expect that I was wrong. That sword has really been hidden by you. But why? Why did he hide such an important sword? He hid it for more than 700 years. At the same time, in London, thousands of miles away from Haotian Jiendi, Longsure Jiendi was laughing wildly. Ha ha, ancestor guessed right. That sword has indeed been hidden by Zetian. Good, as expected of His Majesty Jiendi, whom I, Longsure, admire the most. You really have the guts to hide that sword for more than 700 years. That's delightful and courageous. Ha 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 ha. After laughing for a long time, Longsure Jiendi finally closed his mouth, and then calmly sat back in front of his TV. Although you, Zetian Jiendi, have hidden it deep enough, it is still in the bag of my city of London. With that little thing around, those little guys are going to suffer. With a rumble, the once colorful candy house finally turned into a pool of black water and no longer existed. Gohan sighed, and then looked at the shining golden sword lady in his hand. Logically speaking, except for the shining golden Genesis splitter, Gohan had not seen any sword that shone as brightly as this one. It was unknown who came up with the awkward-sounding name of Genesis Earth Cleaver Star. Generally speaking, people called it the Cleaver Sword. It was a sword Maiden at the immortal sword level. Legend had it that it was the sword of the hero king Gilgamesh. It was now stored in Berlin's sword tower. The sword lady should be the most dazzling sword lady among all the sword lady pictures that Gohan had seen. Even through the computer screen, Gohan could see the dazzling golden light. Every molecule that made up the sword lady seemed to want to make its own golden light shine, so it was said to be the most dazzling sword lady in the world. Gohan once thought so, but when he saw the sword lady in his hand, he decisively withdrew this idea. Although the sword in his hand did not have the aura of the sword of Paragon, the golden light was completely restrained, hiding the overwhelming aura of a king within his body. Only those who understood swords would be able to see that the golden light on his body was so outstanding, so powerless, that people could not help but want to kneel at the feet of this sword maiden. If the sword lady was said to be a well-dressed and elegant noble son, then the sword Gohan was talking about was probably a hidden dragon in the abyss. It was like Liu Bang, the ancestor of the Han dynasty who molested innocent women in Pei County. The sword was golden in color, and its appearance was not special. It looked the same as most bronze swords from ancient times. But the two sides of the sword's blade were extremely amazing, engraved with all kinds of patterns. The two sides of the sword's blade were engraved with different pictures. The author of these pictures was probably an abstract painter. Even with Gohan's imagination, he could not tell what the pictures were. They were even more Picasso than Picasso. Gohan could only judge based on his own feelings. One side of the sword was probably the sky, the sun, and the moon, while the other side was the mountains, rivers, and grass. This was the limit that Gohan could distinguish. Although there were no pictures on the sword's hilt, lines of extremely small hieroglyphs were written. These words were so small that even a magnifying glass would take up a lot of effort to read them. On the two sides of the sword's hilt, there were more than 1,000 words, and they were the hieroglyphs that took up the most space. From this, one could imagine how small the words engraved on the sword's hilt were. They were about the thickness of a strand of hair. Gohan did not know any hieroglyphs, so he did not know what was written in the words. Gohan only knew that this was an extremely powerful sword. From what Gohan could feel on his skin, the power contained in the sword's blade was thousands, tens of thousands of times more than the Juzi sword. Gohan could not confirm how powerful the sword was, because the sword's power had already surpassed the limit that Gohan could sense. Thousands of times was only Gohan's guess. Could it be that this is the Emperor's sword that His Majesty Hao Tian mentioned? Gohan muttered to himself absent-mindedly. Jiandi's senses could not be wrong. Jiandi said that an Emperor's sword would be born in the training array, so there was an 80 to 90% chance that there really was a Jiandi here. Combined with the power that Gohan could not estimate, Gohan was already 70 to 80% sure that this was the strongest power that humans could control, and it was also the Emperor's sword that protected the survival and development of humans at the end of the world. Emperor's sword, the sword's sword. This was a term that could make all sword-bearers excited just by hearing its name. This was a sword lady that 999% of sword-bearers could only look up to in their lifetime, and they would not even have the chance to see it. This was the thing that all sword-bearers yearned for the most. Even in their next life, the next life after that, even if they had to work hard for others for dozens or hundreds of lifetimes, they would still be willing to obtain it. And now, this thing was in the hands of Gohan. Thinking of this, Gohan could not help but tremble. It would be great if this was my own sword lady. Gohan thought, but he knew that this was impossible. The Juzi sword could be in Gohan's hands, and others would not blame Gohan for anything, because this was the sword lady that Gohan had discovered. Gohan had the right to keep it as his own item while he was still alive. Only after Gohan died, Sword Pavilion would forcefully take back the sword lady. However, if this was really an Emperor's sword, then Gohan would not keep it by his side at all, because Sword Pavilion would definitely not allow an Emperor's sword lady to be kept as a collection by a sword bearer. This kind of important human weapon could only be kept in the hands of Sword Pavilion, and wait for the Emperor's sword to awaken and begin to wander the world. The unknown Emperor's sword in Gohan's hands had to be handed over to Sword Pavilion for safekeeping after Gohan returned to the base city, so it was not considered as Gohan's own. This was probably the reason why I Ching had not mentioned this Emperor's sword from the beginning to the end. In her eyes, this Emperor's sword did not belong to Gohan, so she would not tell Gohan any detailed information about this Emperor's sword. In fact, she did not care about this Emperor's sword at all. No. I Ching should be most concerned about this Emperor's sword. Gohan's heart skipped a beat, and he could not help but recall the process of discovering this Emperor's sword. When I Ching's body completely melted, Gohan vaguely heard a clang. However, at that time, Gohan was immersed in his grief for I Ching, so he did not pay attention to the source of the sound. After thinking about it, he realized that the sword was on the sofa, and when Gohan picked up the melted I Ching, the sword was definitely not on the sofa. This sword should have appeared when I Ching's voice disappeared, and the clang was the sound of the sword falling on the sofa. This meant that the sword was very likely hidden in I Ching's body. In fact, I Ching's candy body was not as simple as a body, she was a container. I Ching's body was like amber, and her body was wrapped around the Emperor's sword in Gohan's hand. Gohan even suspected that Zhetian Jiandi had created this candy I Ching's body to hide this Emperor's sword. If one knew that Emperor's swords were usually hidden in unknown, mysterious places, and only when the Emperor's sword wanted to appear, would it appear in the human world. Awaken. Then, it would release a brilliant sword light. The Emperor's sword was like a strong magnetic point that emitted strong electromagnetic waves, and it could attract the attention of all Emperor sword wielders and Emperor sword wielders at all times. Once this Emperor's sword appeared, in Jiandi's eyes, it would be as dazzling as the sun in the sky, even if it was thousands of miles away. It was impossible for them not to discover the existence of this Emperor's sword. In reality, Gohan seemed to be able to feel two untraceable and bright gazes from Yanjing City and London City. Their gazes were focused on the Emperor's sword in Gohan's hand. Hence, if one wanted to hide this sword, they had to use special materials to seal it. This should be the reason for Candy I Ching's existence, which was to seal this sword, so that other Jiendi would not be able to find any trace of this sword. Gohan, do you have any clothes? Qinpin wants to change. It's so dirty. Guyun wants to change too, we want to wear the panda clothes. Qinpin and Guyun ran over hand in hand, interrupting Gohan's thoughts. Gohan lowered his head and saw that Qinpin and Guyun's bodies were black. A crocodile and a shark, which were originally green and blue, had turned black. It looked as if they had been soaked in black ink. Gohan, you can't blame us. We were playing happily with the rabbits and foxes in the bushes when they suddenly turned into black water and dirted our clothes. We really didn't roll around on the ground. Qinpin explained with an innocent face. If her body was not covered in mud, Gohan would definitely believe her. Of course, this was not the main point. As far as Gohan could see, the entire fairy tale kingdom had begun to collapse. All the animals had disappeared, the originally green grass had become scorched black, and all the leaves on the trees had fallen, turning the place into a barren army. Even the artificial sun and stars in the sky had begun to flicker, as if the voltage was insufficient and could be extinguished at any time. This place is about to completely collapse, we have to leave. Etian had also returned to Gohan's side. Her body was also soaked in black water. Could it be that she had also been playing with a rabbit in her arms? Alright, Gohan didn't have the time to guess Etian's maiden's heart. He looked at the collapsing scene around him with a sense of loss, then bowed his head and said, "Goodbye." He touched the green stone ring on his finger, then disappeared with the sword lady. Chapter 429. Blessed Curls, has an hour passed? Reinhardt, who was somewhat anxious, asked a small follower behind him. The little follower secretly rolled his eyes at Reinhardt and thought to himself, "Can't you display the time on your personal terminal? Do you have to ask me so that you can show me that I'm your follower?" Unfortunately, he only silently complained in his heart, because he knew that Reinhardt was a person that Longsher Jiendi valued very much. There were even rumors in London that Reinhardt was Longsher Jiendi's illegitimate son, which was why he valued him so much. In short, he didn't dare to confront Reinhardt face to face, so he could only glance at his own time, and then replied with a smile, "Boss, it's already 14:25, it's been 50 minutes since that kid entered the finish line." "Is that so? He's finally coming out." Reinhardt raised his eyebrows and secretly ordered Blessed Curls through his personal terminal, "You tell all the brothers to be on high alert, release the sword maidens, and listen to my command later, understand?" "Understood." Blessed Curls nodded, but then he was puzzled. "Big brother, that kid is just a civilian, is it necessary to let all the brothers be on high alert? With Big Brother here, isn't it a piece of cake?" "What do you know, that kid is not that easy to deal with." Reinhardt glared at Blessed Curls. "That kid can defeat that Yuan co-boss. His strength is probably the strongest among all the people present. Not to mention me alone, even if we go together, I'm afraid it will be somewhat dangerous. Moreover, that Liunian Ling and that kid are together. I'm afraid that the people of Yanjing City will help him. Do you think our brothers can beat this group of people from Yanjing City? As long as we work hard, and be a little hot-blooded." Originally, Blessed Curls wanted to say that as long as one was hot-blooded, nothing was impossible, but after thinking about it, his legs trembled when he thought of the Lun Yen clan's billion sword skill. He was fortunate enough to see the billion sword skill. At that time, the sky was filled with tens of thousands of swords. That scene, he would never forget it for the rest of his life. "Forget it, I'm afraid that I won't have time to remind you when the time comes. Tell our brothers to be more alert. If the situation is not right, we will defend with all our might. Do you understand?" Defense? Shouldn't everyone be attacking? Blessed Curls suddenly didn't understand what Reinhardt was trying to say. "You don't need to know. You just need to pass on the message." After saying that, Lionheart didn't say another word to Blessed Curls, because at this time, the entire trial hall began to shake, Then a crack appeared in the space. Gohan took Pin and Etion and jumped down from this crack. Boy, you're finally willing to come out. Seeing Gohan appear, Reinhardt took the lead and jumped in front of Gohan. Then, he saw the golden sword in Gohan's hand and was stunned. It's her. That's right, it's her. It's exactly the same as the picture His Majesty showed me. This is the Emperor's sword hidden here. Reinhardt swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His whole body was excited. He, Reinhardt, was actually lucky enough to see the Emperor's sword with his own eyes. Moreover, he was so close to the Emperor's sword. As long as he stretched out his hand, the Emperor's sword would be in his hand. Reinhardt stretched out his hand on the spot, wanting to take the Emperor's sword in Gohan's hand. Pa! A loud sound was heard, and a long red and swollen mark appeared on Reinhardt's face. This was because Etion saw that Reinhardt's pig hand was about to make a move, so she couldn't help but slap Reinhardt's face with the blade of her sword. You've got guts! Reinhardt's face was swollen like a monkey's butt. It could be seen how powerful Etion's slap was. It was so painful that Reinhardt almost cried. Pfft, this heroine has even beaten Tianjindi. Do you think I'm afraid of an idiot like you? If you know what's good for you, then take back your pig trotters and get lost from this heroine's eyes. Etion scolded him mercilessly. You! Reinhardt's breath was stuck in his throat, and he almost couldn't spit it out. As the saying goes, don't expose a person's shortcomings, and don't hit a person's face in a fight. Reinhardt had lived for so long, but he had never been hit in the face. This made Reinhardt so angry that he wanted to fight with Gohan on the spot. However, there was one thing that Reinhardt couldn't understand. How could Etion break through his personal shield and hit his face? It should be known that Reinhardt was already prepared. He was already holding the sword lady in his hand, and his personal shield had already been activated. Etion's sword could only hit his personal shield, and it was impossible for it to hit his face. Here, I'll return it to you. This sword is quite useful, and it feels great to use. At this time, Etion handed the sword back to Gohan. Gohan didn't say anything. He just smiled and put the sword back into his dimensional pocket. However, in that instant, Lionheart was able to clearly see what Etion had handed to Gohan. It turned out that what Etion had used to hit him wasn't her heavenly sword at all, but a toy sword made of wood. Because it was a toy sword, it was impossible for it to be imbued with something like sword essence. Therefore, the sword didn't trigger the personal shield's automatic protection function, and it directly hit Reinhardt's face. Damn it! Reinhardt continuously gritted his teeth. Surnamed Gu, is this how you restrain your sword lady? I didn't do anything, but your sword lady indiscriminately attacked her comrade. In your eyes, do you still have the law of a sword wielder? Do you even have the slightest bit of comradeship? This Reinhardt was quite good at talking. He directly put a hat on Gohan's head that disregarded the law and the comradeship of his comrades. Don't look down on this hat. If this hat was really worn, Gohan would suffer. Because what Reinhardt said was the truth. Although Reinhardt didn't ask for Gohan's opinion and wanted to touch Gohan's Emperor's sword, which was a very taboo thing to do, it wasn't to the extent that Gohan could hurt him. At most, Gohan could only explicitly reject Reinhardt. This was like asking someone to borrow money, but not only did the other party refuse to lend it to you, but he also directly beat you up. Although the one who did it was Gohan's sword lady and not Gohan himself, the sword lady and the sword wielder were on the same side. If the Discipline Committee of the Communist Party carefully examined the law and decided to sentence him, not to mention anything else, he would be sent to jail for around 2 years. Hearing Reinhardt's words, Gohan didn't reply. His expression didn't change either, and he maintained a look of silence. Gohan's original intention was to disdain talking to Reinhardt, but Reinhardt mistakenly thought that Gohan was afraid. He immediately sneered. Brat, give me the sword in your hand and I'll forget about this matter. I won't go to the discipline committee of the Communist Party to complain about you. How about it? This is a very good deal. You won't be able to use that sword for the rest of your life, so why not give it to me and save yourself a few years in the discipline committee of the Communist Party's prison? Reinhardt's threatening posture towards Gohan was extremely ugly, and the sword wielder from the other cities couldn't stand it anymore. The way Reinhardt was drooling over the sword in Gohan's hand was clearly telling them that the sword was the most precious treasure in the trial formation, an Emperor's sword lady. Miss Ling, the Emperor's sword can't be taken by the people of London City. When I came, Hao Tianjiendi sent me a message, telling us to do our best to bring this Emperor's sword back to Yuzhong City. We must get that sword before Reinhardt does. Once the sword is in Reinhardt's hands, it will be very difficult for us to get it back. A Yanjing City sword wielder moved closer to Liu Ling and whispered into her ear. It seemed that Yanjing City was also determined to get this Emperor's sword. This was very normal. The other cities were also drooling over the Emperor's sword in Gohan's hands, wishing that they could have it in their own hands. However, they didn't have the Emperor's sword behind them, so they had to be cautious at this time. If they didn't force out the trump card in Reinhardt's hands, no one was willing to stand out. No need, that sword is the safest in Gohan's hands. If Reinhardt wants to snatch something from his hands, he won't be able to without paying a sufficient price. At that time, it won't be too late for us to make a move. Liu Ling said lightly. Even a fool could guess that Reinhardt was so arrogant because Long Jiendi had given him something. Now it was up to Gohan to deal with this difficult problem. Before Gohan was in danger, Liu Ling didn't intend to make a move. "Tsk, you fat pig, shut up for this heroine. This heroine will take responsibility for this matter alone. The person who hit you is me. If you have the guts, let your sword lady fight with me." In the face of Reinhardt's coercion, Tian spat on the ground and took all the responsibility on herself. Tian. Gohan sighed and said, "You used too little strength just now. It's best to slap his mouth until he can no longer speak. That way, you don't have to listen to a wild boar's crazy barking here." Gohan. Tian turned around and saw Gohan's face filled with gentleness. Tian imagined it, as she said to him. "Good, good, good." Reinhardt said "good" 3 times with a ferocious expression. He then turned to look at Liu Ling behind him. "Miss Liu Ling, I, Reinhardt, request a duel with this person. This matter concerns the dignity of the City of London. You have no right to refuse." As mentioned before, the Lu Nian family had the right to arbitrate. This right naturally included the right to arbitrate whether a duel could be carried out. Generally speaking, when 2 sword-bearers had an unavoidable conflict in the wild, they would have the right to start a duel. There were many factors that would determine whether a duel was necessary. The dignity of the sword-bearers was one of the most important factors. Reinhardt had just been slapped in the face and insulted by Gohan. This was completely in line with the conditions for a duel. At this time, as long as Liu Ling nodded, the duel could start. "Mr. Gohan, do you agree to Mr. Reinhardt's request for a duel?" Since this duel was reasonable, Liu Ling could only confirm the matter with Gohan. "Sure, I have no objections," Gohan said calmly. Chapter 430. At this moment, the middle of the hall was empty. Only Reinhardt, Liu Ling, and Gohan were standing in the middle of the hall. This empty space was naturally prepared for the duel between Gohan and Reinhardt. "May I ask, Mr. Reinhardt, have you decided to start a duel with Mr. Gohan that concerns your dignity, and that you will completely submit to the result of the duel?" Liu Ling, who was standing between Gohan and Reinhardt, asked Reinhardt. This was a necessary step before the duel. They had to confirm the legality of the entire duel and the various conditions of the duel. The host of the duel would record the entire process and send it to the base city for archiving. This was to prevent anyone from going back on their word. "I confirm." Reinhardt touched his red and swollen face and said while gritting his teeth. Then, Mr. Gohan, do you also agree to this duel and completely submit to the result of the duel? Liu Ling confirmed with Gohan. Gohan naturally agreed. Very well. Then, as for the rules of the duel, which duel rule do you two wish to use among the 7 duel rules? Liu Ling said again. The so-called duel rules, as the name suggested, referred to the various restrictions of the duel. The lowest level duel rule was the first level duel rule, which was the most restrictive. This duel rule only allowed the 2 sword bearers to use a sword maiden of the same level to fight. If the depth of the sword mark was different, then the depth of the sword mark must be limited to the level of the lower sword maiden. Apart from the sword maiden itself, no other props were allowed. They were not allowed to damage the durability of the sword maiden, and they were not allowed to attack the sword bearer. In short, this first level duel rule was the most restrictive and restrictive rule. I choose the 7th level duel rule. I don't know if Mr. Gohan has the guts to agree, Reinhardt said with a sneer. The 7th level duel rule was on the other end of the spectrum compared to the first level duel rule. Apart from not breaking the sword maiden and not harming the sword bearer's life, there were no other restrictions. If Reinhardt was willing, he could even cut off Gohan's hands and feet, then humiliate Gohan in all sorts of ways. In the end, he just had to throw Gohan into the medical pod to ensure that he wouldn't die. The 7th level duel rule was definitely a very cruel duel rule. In the entire human world, very few people would use the 7th level duel rule. Usually, duels started for the sake of dignity would choose the 5th level duel rule, which was to protect the opponent's body. The 7th level duel rule, which was cruel and absolute, would only be brought up when it involved the hatred of life. Of course, the 7th level duel rule was proposed by Reinhardt alone. Gohan could completely reject this rule and negotiate later. I'm fine with it. Gohan didn't reject it and directly agreed to Reinhardt's request. What a joke. Since the other party wanted to court death, there was no reason for Gohan not to welcome him warmly. Gohan was the real master of the green onion stone trial formation. As long as Gohan thought about it, hundreds of memory fragments would run over to help Gohan beat people up. Why would Gohan be afraid of Reinhardt? Ha 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 ha, you've got guts. If you weren't holding that sword in your hand, then I, Reinhardt, might even be willing to be friends with you. Reinhardt laughed out loud when he heard Gohan's promise. From Reinhardt's point of view, when Gohan agreed to the 7th level duel rule, the victory of this duel was already in Reinhardt's hands. Then the last question. Liu Ling clapped her hands. As a duel, there must be rewards and punishments for the duel. May I ask what are the rewards and punishments for the duel? I want him to hand over the sword in his hand to me, then kneel on the ground and apologize for insulting the city of London, Reinhardt said first. What about you, Mr. Gohan? Liu Ling turned to ask Gohan. In the end, Gohan didn't say a word for a long time because Gohan didn't know what he wanted from Reinhardt. Gohan wasn't interested in making Reinhardt kneel and apologize to him. It didn't have any practical meaning. Gohan didn't know what Reinhardt had that was worth coveting. At this time, I Ching had given him 20 sword mark engravings, which made Gohan a tycoon. Gohan didn't care about what Reinhardt had. Tell me, what do you want? Seeing that Gohan didn't speak for a long time, Reinhardt became anxious. He thought that Gohan had gone back on his words and didn't want to duel with him. If that was the case, Reinhardt would have to take action by force and snatch the Emperor's sword from Gohan's hands. Although this was similar to a duel where he would have to fight with Gohan, Reinhardt's reputation would probably become unbearably bad in the eyes of the other sword bearers if he snatched it without any reason. In fact, most of this duel was deliberately led by Reinhardt in order to reasonably and legally snatch the Emperor's sword from Gohan's hands. Although Long Shi Jiandi had taken the blame for him, Reinhardt still didn't want to ruin his reputation if he could. How about this? If I, Reinhardt, lose, I will hand this person over to you. You can do whatever you want to me. You can do whatever you want to me. What do you think? In order to let the duel go smoothly, Reinhardt took the initiative to put forward such a proposal. Guhan definitely had no interest in Reinhardt, but his words made Guhan's mind light up. Perhaps this Reinhardt really has his own use. My request is that if I win, then Reinhardt will be mine. Guhan finally gave his promise. Very good. Then, Mr. Guhan, Mr. Reinhardt, do you have any objections to your rewards and punishments? Liu Nianling finally confirmed. No objections. No objections. Then I announce that under the witness of the 29th generation successor of the Liunian clan, Liu Nianling, Mr. Guhan from Yuzhong City, and Mr. Reinhardt from London will have a fair duel established under the Level 7 duel rules. In this duel, both sides can use any swordplay, any weapon, any tool, any tactic, any strategy to cause damage to any part of the opponent as long as they don't break the opponent's swordplay or kill the opponent. This duel will continue until one side loses the ability to fight or surrenders. If Reinhardt is the winner, he will receive the golden swordplay from Guhan and a kneeling apology. If Guhan is the winner, he will receive the right to use Reinhardt's body. After Liu Nianling finished her speech, Reinhardt quickly entered his battle state because the duel had already begun. Sacred. Glory. Death, death, vermilion. Aaron, incest. The falling, fallen. Blessing, protection. Suddenly, Lionheart's style changed. He stuck the huge sword in his hand into the ground and started to chant strange English words loudly and clearly. Although Reinhardt was a Londoner, 95% of the English people had probably forgotten how to speak English in this era where Mandarin was the king. Only the most ancient English aristocratic families still mastered this traditional English language. It seemed like Reinhardt was already very familiar with these words. When he chanted them, it made people's blood boil. It would be a pity if he didn't become a voice actor in a hot-blooded anime. Speaking of which, it had been a long time since Guhan had heard such a Chunibyu explanation. Generally speaking, only the Chunibyu youths in the game would like to say such shameful Chunibyu explanations when they liberated the Sword Lady. In real life, the wielder of a sword would never do such a thing. This wasn't because of face, but because the song was not only long, but also had to be accompanied by a rhythmic tone and movement. It might even take more than 10 seconds to chant. If there was so much time, Yuan Ko would have already rushed to the side of the sword wielder and killed him. Therefore, sword wielders in real life wouldn't bother with things like song interpretation. He didn't expect Reinhardt to like this kind of thing. Fortunately, this was a duel. Ordinary people wouldn't take advantage of this time to attack. Otherwise, Reinhardt would have been lying on the ground. Unfortunately, Guhan wasn't an ordinary person. Most importantly, he couldn't stand someone chanting such a Chunibyu song in front of him, and he could only watch like an idiot. Therefore, when Reinhardt chanted the fourth word, the heavenly sword moved. The heavenly sword was already in a liberated state. Guhan had even skipped the step of liberating the Sword Lady. The heavenly sword's figure flashed, and in less than 2 seconds, it appeared in front of Reinhardt. It raised its heavenly sword and was about to slash at Reinhardt's head. What a fast speed! Everyone who saw this scene narrowed their eyes. At this moment, the distance between Guhan and Reinhardt should be the official standard for a duel between sword-bearers of the sword tier, which was 100 meters. However, the heaven-reliant sword had actually used only 2 seconds to reach Reinhardt. This speed was practically like that of a ghost. My dear brother, did I remember wrong? Didn't they say that the maximum speed of a sword wielder is 20 meters per second? How can this swordplay be so fast? Mylan, one of the leaders of the Buenos Aires army, asked her brother in a panic. This speed was too terrifying for a sword maiden of the treasure sword rank. My dear sister, I don't know either. Messi said bitterly. But this Yuzhong man's sword maiden is the heaven-relieving sword. The heaven-relieving sword is comparable to the top-ranking sword maidens. If the heaven-relieving sword is improved to the first grade, it's not impossible for him to reach his current speed. It's deepened to the first grade. Maiden didn't know if she should open her mouth or close it. As the leader of the Buenos Aires army, her sword wielder was only deepened to the third grade. Maiden really couldn't afford the rest of the sword marks. Brother, can you defeat him? Can we defeat him together? Maiden originally wanted to ask if her brother could defeat Gohan. Perhaps she felt that it was impossible, so she changed her question to whether the two of them could defeat Gohan together. Be reasonable, my dear sister. Messi said very seriously, we should be friends with him. Why must we be enemies? A great man from the East once said, politics is to make more friends for yourself and fewer friends for your enemies. I think this is the most correct principle in the world. Chapter 431. Oh my God! What happened to Heavenly Sword in the past 10 days? Heavenly Sword is now 3 times faster than when it was fighting Ashima. Liu Ling couldn't help but exclaim in admiration when she saw Heavenly Sword's speed. She was the person who understood Gohan's combat strength the most. She had watched the entire battle with Ashima and found that Heavenly Sword's speed had increased by 3 times. No wonder Heavenly Sword is so strong after a month. So this is the reason. The other person who was familiar with Gohan's combat strength was Ashima. As Gohan's direct opponent, she felt that Heavenly Sword was even stronger than Liu Ling previously. She couldn't understand how Etion could become so strong after a month. Now that she saw Etion's terrifying movement speed, she understood. It seemed like this improvement had happened in a short span of 10 days. Could it be that Gohan has already reached the level of a famed sword wielder in the past 10 days? That's impossible. There's no way to increase sword essence in this trial formation. At first, Ashima suspected that Gohan had become a famed swordsman in the past 10 days. However, it was impossible to replenish sword essence in this trial formation. There was no real Yuan Ko here. Of course, Gohan hadn't reached the level of a famed swordsman. In fact, apart from synchronizing with the Doyu sword and gaining 1,000 quarks of sword essence, Gohan hadn't gained a single quark of sword essence. Currently, he had around 4,000 sword essence in his body. Heavenly Sword hadn't reached the level of a grade 1 famed swordsman either. Although I Ching had given Gohan enough sword essence to reach the level of a grade 1 sword essence, it would take a lot of time. Gohan had returned directly after leaving Fairy Tail Valley, so where would he have the time to give Heavenly Sword essence? The real reason why Heavenly Sword's strength had changed so much was naturally because of the yin-yang swordsmanship technique. Even though Gohan's Doyu sword was hidden in his dimensional pocket, the attribute enhancement from the two still existed on Gohan and Heavenly Sword. For the Sword Maiden, the sum of 2 wasn't as simple as 2. In reality, the combat power displayed was almost 3 times that of the original. Even the spectating sword bearers felt their hearts palpitate at the terrifying power of 3 times their strength. What about Lionheart, who was being attacked by the Heavenly Sword? This person was completely dumbfounded. When the Heavenly Sword attacked, Reinhardt was still thinking of using this opportunity to finish chanting the sword scripture. In any case, it would take at least 7 or 8 seconds. However, Reinhardt immediately regretted it. In the blink of an eye, the Heavenly Sword was already in front of him. Reinhardt was not an idiot, and he did not have the habit of wasting his time. He decisively gave up on chanting the sword hymn and immediately poured the sword essence into the greatsword in his hand. With a flash of red light, a sword lady dressed in blood-red armor appeared beside Reinhardt. Unfortunately, the sword lady appeared too late. She had only just opened her eyes to take a good look at her surroundings when the Heavenly Sword's blade had already arrived beside Reinhardt. Then, it stabbed into Reinhardt's head. Reinhardt could only feel his head buzzing as if there were countless flies flying around. The entire world became dark and trembled. Reinhardt knew that he had been attacked in an important part of his body, such as his temple, heart, and so on. These parts of his body had relatively weak shield. Once he was attacked, he would feel great discomfort. Red Hilt, help me stop her. I need time. The moment he was sent flying, Reinhardt used the last of his strength to order his red hilt to protect him. Red Hilt was the sword of Galahad, one of the 12 knights of the Round Table under King Arthur's command. It belonged to the 12 knights of the Round Table series of sword maidens, who all wore medieval knight armor. Red Hilt's armor was rather unique. It was different from the other knights of the Round Table, which focused on defense. Red Hilt's armor seemed lighter and thinner, as if it was a defective product that had been skimped on. Many parts of her body were exposed. Only the armor on her back was extremely thick. Just by looking at it, one could tell that this part of the armor had terrifying defensive power. Red Hilt's main body, Red Hilt, had a unique appearance. Rather than a sword, it was better to call it a large cross. It was inlaid with all kinds of gems and emitted a dazzling light. Yes, my dear friend. Red Hilt's eyes flashed with a blood-red light. She then stood in front of Reinhardt and held the cross in front of her. Stop, sister. If you dare to take one more step towards my dear friend, you will have to bear the endless attacks of Red Hilt. Who the hell are you? Get out of my way. I don't know you. Heavenly Sword glanced at Red Hilt casually and was about to continue looking for trouble with Reinhardt, who was lying on the ground recovering. Naturally, Red Hilt wouldn't let Heavenly Sword pass. She firmly blocked Heavenly Sword's path. Humph, a mere Redford sword dares to compete with me, how you? Etion swung his sword horizontally and slashed towards Red Hilt. Etion did not increase his sword speed, he just calmly slashed forward. In front of my Red Hilt holy light, all evil will turn into sheep, Red Hilt muttered. The many gems on Red Hilt's sword began to emit laser-like rays of light towards Heavenly Sword in front of her. What kind of light is this? Heavenly Sword instantly stopped when it saw the light shining on its body. It was as if its pressure points had been poked. Humph, arrogant fool. How can you be a match for me, Red Hilt? On the other hand, seeing that Heavenly Sword had stopped, Red Hilt revealed a satisfied smile. The light just now was her basic skill, Petrify Curse. It could petrify an opponent for a whole 10 seconds. Moreover, this curse would definitely succeed against an opponent of the same level. Let me end you now with my Rock Crush. The hilt of the Red Hilt flashed with a crimson light, and then the two guards separated from the hilt. In an instant, they shot towards the petrified sky reliance like arrows from a bow. This was Red Hilt's advanced skill, Rock Crush. It could separate the two handguards from the sword hilt and launch a powerful attack. The strength of this attack was that it had a chance of triggering the Rock Crush effect. When her opponent was petrified, they would receive 1000% damage. This was already enough to instantly kill many Yuan Ko of the same level. As such, Red Hilt was filled with confidence. She felt that this annoying Dongfang sword lady would definitely not be a match for her. If she knew that her opponent was actually Heavenly Sword, and a Heavenly Sword that had been strengthened by 3 times, she would definitely not think this way. What the hell is this? Heavenly Sword, who was originally petrified, suddenly swung the Heavenly Sword in her hand. The two handguards that had shot out were sent flying hundreds of meters away. The speed at which they were sent flying was even faster than the speed at which they were flying towards Heavenly Sword. What a powerful opponent! Heaven's Stairway. Only now did Red Hilt realize how powerful her opponent was. The petrifying combo that had never failed in the past had actually failed. Red Hilt panicked and immediately prepared to use her ultimate skill, Heaven's Stairway. Heaven's Stairway was Red Hilt's ultimate skill. It actually projected an extremely long illusory stairway in the sky that seemed to reach the clouds. Once the stairway was formed, she would be able to 100% lock onto her opponent and bring them to Heaven's Stairway. How was it? Didn't it sound like it was going to explode the heavens? Heavens, has Red Hilt been forced out of Heaven's Stairway? Looks like Red Hilt is going to go all out. Stop looking. Heaven's Stairway has already appeared. This sword lady is going to lose for sure. The London sword-bearers all discussed amongst themselves. They felt that Gohan was about to lose. This was because their impression of Heaven's stairway was just too deep. Lionheart had relied on this move to sweep through London. The effect of Heaven's stairway was indeed very powerful. By consuming the energy of her personal shield, she could directly deal true damage equivalent to the energy of her personal shield to her opponent. It was equivalent to using Red Hilt's personal shield energy to exchange for the opponent's personal shield energy. After Lionheart became a sword-level swordsman, he relied on his family's power and spent a lot of money to upgrade the Red Hilt sword to Grade 1, awakening the Red Hilt sword's ultimate skill. He was the only one of a kind among all the young sword-level swordsmen in London. In addition, Red Hilt had reached level 1. In terms of defense, none of the young sword-rank sword-bearers in London could surpass Red Hilt in defense. Therefore, Red Hilt's ultimate skill became a legend in London. No sword lady could resist Red Hilt's ultimate skill. This was also the reason why Lionheart was unbeatable in London. It was because his sword Scar Profound was too high level, and his ultimate skill was too overpowered. However, it was a pity that Red Hilt had picked the wrong opponent this time. She shouldn't have picked on Heavenly Sword. Eteon's lips curled up into a disdainful smile as he looked at the flight of stairs that was gradually extending to his feet. The Heavenly Sword in his hand trembled a little and left an afterimage on the stairs. In an instant, the sword burst like a soap bubble. "My kingdom of Heaven's stairway has been slashed apart." Red Hilt Sword was terrified. To be able to destroy his ultimate move with one slash meant that the opponent's swordsmanship had reached an extremely shocking level, able to tear apart the entire space at an extremely fast speed. Only then could it be possible to destroy the illusion of his kingdom of Heaven's stairway. Red Hilt had no way of resisting such power. In reality, Red Hilt did not resist at all. Although Red Hilt was a knight's equipment, she relied on her skills like a mage. She did not have much knowledge in swordsmanship, and was probably no better than King Yu, who had forgotten his own swordsmanship. Thus, when all of her skills were nullified, Hong Hilt's sword could only wait for death. The heaven-reliant sword slashed down on her chest, sending her flying. As she flew through the air, her body disappeared, and she reverted back to a sword covered in cracks. Because Red Hilt had used up all of her shield's energy to use the Heaven's Stairway, her personal shield had already disappeared when Heavenly Sword struck her, and Heavenly Sword's attack had directly hit her body. If Heavenly Sword hadn't discovered that her personal shield had disappeared, and was scared into withdrawing part of her sword essence, Red Hilt would have been slashed in half. However, even though Heavenly Sword had withdrawn its power, Red Hilt was still heavily injured. Looking at the cracks on her blade, around 50% of her durability had been lost. "You're next. Stay there and don't move. Let me slap the other side of your face until it's swollen, and I'll allow you to surrender." Heavenly Sword chuckled, looking extremely arrogant. Lionheart did not notice that he had secretly taken out a small item from his dimensional pocket after recovering his consciousness during the precious battle. Chapter 432. Reinhardt, do you know why we are going to Chongyang Mountain this time? In a huge living room, Longsher Jiendi was sitting on the sofa, watching the variety show run, sword bearer in front of him very seriously. Behind him, Reinhardt was standing there respectfully. "It is to rescue Miss Liu Ling, and to obtain the Sword Lady of the Emperor's sword level," Reinhardt replied. "It seems that you are very clear about your mission. This is very good. Then let me ask you again, do you have the confidence to rely on your own ability to get that Emperor's sword from the other 7 base cities?" Longsher Jiendi asked. "Yes." Reinhardt gritted his teeth and thought for a long time. He felt that he could not lose his momentum in front of Longsher Jiendi, so he spat out the word yes. "You have a fart!" A cup of hot tea flew towards Reinhardt's face. Normal people would instinctively avoid him when they saw this situation. However, Reinhardt did not dare to move. He stood straight and let the teacup hit his face. The hot tea poured on his skin, burning red spots one after another. Reinhardt's face looked as if he had red measles. Reinhardt, you are just a piece of trash. Even if you rely on your red hilt sword to obtain the achievement of the best sword-level person, you are still a piece of trash. Longsher Jiandi's words were like a basin of cold water, completely dousing the heart of Reinhardt, who was originally excited because of seeing Longsher Jiandi. I will only let you go, Reinhardt, because there is no one among the sword-bearers of the sword level. Remember, you must bring that sword back to me this time. Even if you face the siege of the 7 cities, you must bring the Emperor's sword back to London. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Reinhardt will bring back the Emperor's sword even if he has to risk his life. Reinhardt knelt behind Longsher Jiandi and deeply buried his originally arrogant head. Life? Those people will not want your life, and your life is not worth much. Not to mention the 7 cities, you can't be a match for Liunian Ling alone. Longsher Jiandi threw a small gourd in front of Reinhardt. Take her with you. Once that Emperor's sword appears, crush this gourd. You don't have to worry about the rest. After speaking, Longsher Jiandi waved his hand. His butler came to Reinhardt's side and took him away from Longsher Jiandi's imperial palace. I thought that only Liunian Ling could suppress me, so I planned to use this thing when facing Liunian Ling. I didn't expect that such a monster would appear in Yuzhong City. It's really ridiculous. Reinhardt smiled bitterly in his heart. Although he didn't want to use this item bestowed by Longsher Jiandi on Gohan, seeing that the red hilt sword that he was so proud of had been defeated by the heavenly sword without even using its big move, Reinhardt knew that it was impossible for him to defeat Gohan. He could only use Longsher Jiandi's trump card. Please, Your Highness Durandal. Reinhardt knelt on the ground and hurriedly crushed the small gourd given to him by Longsher Jiandi before Heavenly Sword could attack him. This is the power of an immortal sword. As Reinhardt crushed the small gourd in his hand, Heavenly Sword, who was already in front of Reinhardt, had goosebumps all over her body. She could feel the unique power of an immortal sword Maiden from Reinhardt's small gourd. Knock Reinhardt out first. As long as he faints, we'll win. Heavenly Sword's face was as calm as water, but she remained calm at this critical juncture. She knew that the way to victory was not to defeat Reinhardt's immortal sword Maiden, but to defeat Reinhardt himself. As long as she could knock Reinhardt out in time, even if Reinhardt summoned the Emperor's sword Maiden, victory would still belong to Heavenly Sword Maiden. Therefore, Heavenly Sword did not care about what would come out of Reinhardt's gourd. Instead, she struck Reinhardt's temple with all her might. As long as Reinhardt fainted, everything would be settled. However, Heavenly Sword was still a step too slow. The immortal sword Maiden in the gourd had finally woken up. With a clang, Heavenly Sword was blocked by a sword. Then, that sword was pushed back slightly. Heavenly Sword was like a soccer ball that had been kicked away. It flew over 100 meters towards Gohan's position and landed right in front of Gohan. That's right. This is the power of an immortal sword. What a detestable power! Heavenly Sword spat on the ground. Just one strike had caused her personal shield to lose around half of its energy. No, this is not the power of an immortal sword. This formation does not allow immortal sword maidens to enter. The thing that I Ching left behind doesn't have such a big loophole. Gohan patted Heavenly Sword's body and smoothed out the creases in her clothes. However, his eyes were fixed on the immortal sword Maiden in front of Reinhardt. Just like the red hilt sword, this immortal sword Maiden was also dressed like a knight. Her pitch-black armor reflected the specks of light, like the starry sky in the night sky. This immortal sword Maiden had a grave and stern expression. Her body was straight and firm like a poplar in the desert. His legs were not tight, there was not even a sliver of gap. The knight's armor was also polished and shiny. It was worn in the most correct position without the slightest bit of crookedness. Her sword and her legs were slightly slanted. If one used an angle ruler to measure it, one would find that the sword and her legs formed a 15-degree angle. Everyone who saw this immortal sword maiden for the first time would involuntarily have the same thought: this is a real knight. Although many immortal sword maidens use the posture of a knight as their first form, only this immortal sword maiden in front of them had the perfect appearance of a knight. She was the role model for countless knights. She was known as the number one holy knight. She was one of the 3 holy swords of Europe. Durandal. It's you, Durandal. Long time no see. Etion seemed to be very familiar with her opponent. In a flash, she appeared in front of Durandal and looked at her with a smile. Yes, long time no see, Lady Etion. Durandal nodded slightly at Etion. It was another extremely standard knight's bow that could be measured with a ruler. After 700 years, Lady Etion is still as elegant as ever. You too, Durandal. 700 years have passed, yet you haven't changed at all. You're still the same old fogey. Etion's words contained a hint of ridicule. If the way of knights cannot be followed, then there is no value in the existence of knight. Durandal's expression was always solemn. There had never been any change in her expression. Durandal was one of the most famous immortal sword maidens. She was the most memorable immortal sword maiden. She was different from the lazy heavenly sword maidens who had only appeared 3 times in 1,000 years. Durandal could be said to be a model sword maiden. She was known as the sword maiden who never slept. In these 1,000 years, she had slept for less than 10 years. She had a total of 21 sword-bearers, and the average time she slept was only half a year. She could be said to be the most hard-working sword mistress who had sacrificed the most for humanity. Durandal had experienced 15 sword immortals and 6 Jindy sword. She had participated in almost all of humanity's major battles in the past 1,000 years. She had fought in more than 17,000 battles for humanity. She had killed more than 5 million Yuan Ko swords, been heavily injured more than 30 times, and almost broken 5 times. All of these achievements had caused every human to have an extremely respectful attitude towards Durandal. There had never been a sword maiden who had fought for humanity to this extent. If you don't believe me, you can look at the other sword maidens, including Gahan and Liunyinling. All of the sword-tier sword maidens were kneeling on one knee, paying their utmost respect to Durandal with the etiquette of a knight. This was an honor that only Emperor sword maidens could receive. This represented the humans' recognition of Durandal. I haven't seen you for 700 years, and you've already received this kind of treatment. Seeing all the sword-bearers kneeling down in respect to Durandal, especially Gu Han kneeling down, Etion's heart began to ache. Your subject fights as a knight, so naturally I should receive the etiquette of a knight. This is the glory of a knight, and also the meaning of your subject's existence. When Durandal said this, there was not a trace of change in her tone or expression. However, Etion could still hear a hint of pride in the other party's tone. Humph, only a fool would be like you, never knowing to rest and running out every day to fight with your life on the line. As Etion spoke, she suddenly thought of something. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, revealing a naughty smile. Let's go. You should also rest for a while. Come and drink with me. Do you still remember the last time you drank with me? You were simply too cute at that time. Durandal seemed to recall some very bad memories, and a rare blush appeared on her face. She then quickly raised her sword to her chest and chanted to the heavenly sword. Etion, this subject has been ordered by Longsher Jindy to bring the Emperor's sword back to London and protect the safety of the Emperor's sword. Please step aside, otherwise you will become this subject's opponent. Durandal did not forget the reason why she came here. She came here to take away the Emperor's sword. That belongs to my sword-bearer, who was also chosen by I Ching. Durandal, give me some face, give I Ching some face, and don't get involved in today's matter. Etion said quickly. From the looks of it, Durandal and Etion Jindy had a close friendship. Etion, this subject is a knight. A knight must be loyal to their king and his majesty. His Majesty Jation's future is already in the past. Right now, this subject's majesty Longsure is this subject's majesty. Please step aside, otherwise, don't blame this subject for fighting you with the etiquette of a knight. Durandar said without thinking. Etion's attempt to gain favor failed. Etion, come back, this is my fight. On the other side, Gohan took Etion back into his hand and turned it back into its original form. This battle was unavoidable. Chapter 433. Very good, very good. Seeing Gohan holding the heavenly sword and facing him, Durandal's eyes revealed a hint of praise. Facing a strong opponent, you can bravely raise your sword, Maiden. Just this point alone shows that you are a very good seedling. Perhaps in the future, you will be able to shoulder the burden of the human race and become a brave knight. Durandal said expectantly. This expectation was not mixed with any impurities. It was an expectation of Gohan's courage. This showed that Durandal was indeed a true knight who took the life and death of the human race as his own responsibility. Many thanks for Sir Paladin's praise. Gohan bowed to express his gratitude. Paladin was the honorific that the humans had for Durandar. Although there were countless Yuaniing who called themselves paladins in the camp, but among the humans, there was only one true paladin, and that was Durandar. You are a human with potential, and this subject does not wish to cause too much harm to you. Now, hand over the Emperor's sword in your hand to this subject, and this matter will end here. This subject swears in the name of a knight that this subject Durandal owes you a favor. Heavens, Sir Paladin is actually using a favor to exchange with him. One of the onlookers exclaimed. That's right, Sir Paladin is truly a noble and respectable knight. It is clearly something easily obtainable, but he still chose to make a fair exchange. This is truly a great sword, Maiden. This Gohan really struck it big this time. He actually obtained a favor from Durandal. Isn't he afraid of nothing now? All of the onlookers spoke one after another. From their conversations, it was clear that they were already standing on Durandal's side. Durandal was clearly using the identity of an immortal sword maiden to bully a treasure sword-grade swordsman. However, it must be admitted that Durandal's favor was indeed something precious. This was not a favor that ordinary people spoke of. As long as this favor was not harmful, did not violate justice, and did not involve the interests of the human race. Even if this favor was beyond the scope of Durandal's ability, Durandal would still repay this favor at all costs. To be honest, compared to handing over the Emperor's sword to the Sword Pavilion for safekeeping after returning to Yuzhong, getting Durandar's favor was actually more cost-effective. If he was really smart, he would have agreed to Durandar's request. Unfortunately, such a favor was not what Gohan wanted at all. Therefore, Gohan shook his head firmly and said, Lord Paladin, I have already reached an agreement with the person behind you. As long as you defeat me, you can obtain this Emperor's sword. Apart from that, there is no other way. Good, very good. Seeing Gohan's attitude, Durandal couldn't help but nod her head repeatedly. She was starting to like this straightforward young man who wasn't intimidated by difficulties and wasn't confused by benefit. If only this person was a Londoner, she would definitely pull Gohan into her holy light knights. Since you have chosen to fight, then this subject will go all out to bestow upon you the glory of a knight. The so-called glory of an all-out knight meant that Durandar would go all out in this upcoming battle. She would use her strongest strength to give Gohan a glorious defeat that would be worthy of bragging. That's right, whether it was a human or a sword mistress, to be defeated by Durandar's all-out attack was undoubtedly something to be proud of. This shows that Durandar has fully recognized your strength. She views you as an opponent who can stand on equal footing with her. What a great glory! Hearing Durandal's words, the surrounding onlookers revealed even more envious and jealous looks. Being able to lose to Sir Durandal's full-strength attack, this human could be said to be completely famous. Durandal had never used his full strength against a sword-grade sword wielder before. This was really too lucky. Unfortunately, at this time, Gohan didn't feel that he was lucky at all. In fact, he was even regretting that he was too arrogant. If he had shown a little bit of fear just now, Durandal might not have gone all out. If that was the case, his chances of winning would have been even higher. That's right, even if he was facing an immortal sword-bearer, Gohan still felt that he had a chance of winning. Because the Durandal in front of him was not the real Durandal, but just a projection formed by borrowing Long Shi Jiandi's power. This was a unique method of Jiandi. He could use his own power to form a power seed, and then let this power seed establish a connection with one of his sword mistresses. A power seed like this was also called a sword mistress clone. This sword mistress clone could be stored in a specific container. Once the container was crushed, the sword mistress clone would instantly transform into the appearance of the sword mistress who had established a connection with the power seed, forming something similar to a clone. Producing such a power seed consumed a lot of Jiandi's power. Even Jiandi could only produce one power seed in half a year. Moreover, Jiandi couldn't use it himself and could only hand it over to others. Generally speaking, sword emperors would give this kind of seed to their closest people to protect their safety in times of danger or to carry out some kind of special task. For example, right now, it was used to snatch the Emperor's sword from Gohan's hands. From this, it could be seen that Long Shi Jiandi had invested a lot in this. Long Shi Jiandi had become Jiandi for less than 5 years, and the number of sword mistress clones in his hands was less than 10. Using one of them on Gohan, it could be said that he had invested a lot. However, it was precisely because this was a sword mistress clone that Gohan felt that he still had a chance to defeat her. As a clone, its power naturally couldn't be as terrifying as the main body. Generally speaking, a sword mistress clone only had about 1/3 of the main body's power, 1/3 of the power of an immortal sword-rank sword mistress. In this way, Durandal's power had been reduced from the peak of immortal sword rank to the level of an ordinary immortal sword rank. After mastering the green onion stone, Gohan had a clear understanding of the entire trial formation. This trial formation limited the strength of a treasured sword wielder to the level of a treasured sword wielder. However, Durandal, who was an immortal sword wielder, had entered. This was a serious violation of the rules set by the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor. As one of the strongest Jiandi in history, Zetian Jiandi had set up a spirit formation with all his might. Even if the main body of an immortal sword-rank sword mistress came, she wouldn't be able to gain any advantage, let alone this was just a sword mistress clone. Therefore, under Gohan's control, all the power of the entire trial formation was concentrated here and began to suppress Durandal. This is the power of Zetian Jiandi. Durandal, who was standing opposite Gohan, suddenly frowned. She felt a suffocating power pressing down on every inch of her body. As a sword mistress who had fought continuously for 1,000 years, Durandal had ample experience in all kinds of situations. She immediately understood that this was the power of the trial formation suppressing her. Because she had violated the rules of the trial formation was now beginning to retaliate. Durandal's guess was very accurate. This was indeed the trial formation's retaliation. However, she definitely didn't expect that this retaliation was actually in the hands of Gohan, and under Gohan's deliberate control. The entire trial formation's power was beginning to suppress her. I feel like I can't breathe. Durandal's body suddenly trembled. It wasn't the trembling of a physical body, but rather a distorted trembling caused by a bad television signal. Durandal's body was originally a doppelganger formed from a power seed, so it didn't have its own physical body. Therefore, it wasn't strange for it to distort like this. No, I can't fight against Zetian Jiandi here. Durandal was finally suppressed by the trial formation's power. She began to take the initiative to seal her own power, and in the end, she was only left with the power of a sword bearer. Only then did the trial formation's suppression suddenly disappear. Sure enough, only sword-bearers are allowed to appear here. Durandal shook her head. It wasn't that she felt that she wouldn't be a match for Guhan after becoming a sword-bearer. Even if she fell to ancient sword-bearer, with her experience and skills, Durandal was still confident that she could ruthlessly suppress Guhan. What she was worried about was that she wouldn't be able to fulfill her promise to use her full strength. I'm sorry, because of the suppression of the trial formation, this subject can't use his full strength. I can only fight you with sword-bearer strength. I'm sorry. Durandal sighed, then bowed to Guhan, apologizing for going back on her words. She didn't feel that her status as an immortal sword-bearer was very noble. A real knight. Seeing Durandal bow to him, Guhan felt touched in his heart. He loudly said to Durandal, "Sir Paladin, please don't take it to heart. Sooner or later, this subject will have an all-out battle with your main body. At that time, please don't hold back." "Good. This subject will wait for the day you become an immortal sword-bearer." Durandal nodded, and with a horizontal slash of the sword in her hand, a powerful pressure burst out from Durandal's body. Except for a few people, almost all the onlookers were crushed to the ground by this gust of wind. Even if she was restricted to sword-bearer, Durandal's strength was not something that ordinary sword-bearers could withstand. "I'm also looking forward to this day. At that time, I will definitely defeat you fair and square," Guhan said to himself. At the same time, his figure flashed, and he appeared in front of Durandal. Guhan took the initiative to attack. 10 minutes later. Heavens, this person has actually been fighting with Sir Paladin for so long. On the stage, the battle between Guhan and Durandal was still going on. The spectators below the stage were all dumbfounded, especially the people from London. The paladin in their hearts had already been fighting with Guhan for a full 10 minutes. Every single move had been exchanged for 10 minutes. Chapter 434. Durandal had no choice but to admit that she had underestimated this sword-wielder. He was actually able to fight her to a standstill with just pure swordsmanship. Durandal had been fighting non-stop for a full 1,000 years. Even if her own talent in swordsmanship was not high, but under the tempering of these 1,000 years, her swordsmanship had reached a very terrifying level. Each of her swordsmanship seemed to have been forged through thousands of tempering. This kind of swordsmanship that had been honed over a long period of time was much more terrifying than those swordsmanship that were learned through innate talent. Therefore, Durandal had 100% confidence in her victory, because she felt that with just her swordsmanship alone, she would be able to teach this kid a good lesson on what true swordsmanship was. But Durandal had miscalculated. She found that the one who would really be taught a lesson was herself, even if her swordsmanship was actually much higher than Guhan's. Yes, no matter how heaven-defying Guhan's talent was, he had only practiced swordsmanship for less than 10 years. Compared to Durandal, who had honed her swordsmanship for thousands of years, they were simply not on the same level. Even Wang Shiji, the sage of calligraphy, had superb talent. But in the first few years of learning to write, his father still commented that his handwriting was not as good as that of his family's accountant, because that accountant had been keeping account books for more than 40 years. His handwriting had already integrated into his skin and flesh. How could Wang Shiji's short few years of practice compare to it? In fact, this was also the reason why there were not many sword masters in the world. Even if it was the first time a sword maiden had awakened, their swordsmanship was honed in their previous life. This was especially so after they had experienced hundreds or even thousands of years of battles after the Great Calamity. Due to the accumulation of generations, their swordsmanship had reached an extremely high level. This level was not something that ordinary sword-bearers with average talent in swordsmanship could achieve in just a few decades of life. Rather than having them fight Yuan Yen with their swords, they might as well let the sword ladies fight on their own. Only those with extraordinary talent in swordsmanship could possibly surpass their own sword maiden's swordsmanship through just a few years or even a dozen years of training. This was the reason why the profession of sword master was born. Let's cut to the chase and return to the main topic. The reason why Durand was at a disadvantage against Gahan was because Durand was not used to her current body. Durand had always fought with the physique of an immortal sword maiden. Now that she was suddenly compressed to the level of a treasured sword, her swordsmanship became uncoordinated and full of loopholes. It was easy to understand. If you asked a racer who drove an F1 car every day to suddenly drive a tractor, he might just drive the tractor straight into the field because he was not used to the speed. At the same time, Durandar was also not used to her current speed. Originally, according to her instincts, she felt that she would be able to hit Gahan in 0.01 seconds, but because her strength was suppressed to artifact sword grade, the time was extended to 0.1 seconds. This time, she was in big trouble. Before Durandar could even complete her attack, she instinctively wanted to change her attack. As a result, Gahan naturally took advantage of this flaw and directly broke through her defense to attack her. On one hand, Durandar was not used to her current body, but with the passage of time, she would definitely adapt to her current body very quickly. What really made Durandar feel sullen was that although she had been suppressed from immortal sword grade to artifact sword grade, the opponent's physique was still at the level of a famed sword grade. Inexplicably, in terms of raw strength, Durandar, who was an immortal sword grade, was suppressed by Gahan. Her full attack speed could not keep up with Gahan's attack speed at all. There was no martial art in the world that could not be broken, only speed could not be broken. If this went on, no matter how high Durandar's swordsmanship was, she would still be defeated by Gahan. Only Durandar and Gahan, the two people involved in the fight, knew what was going on. As for the spectators, they did not know what was going on. They only had one thought: this Gahan's swordsmanship was very strong, very scary. He was not human at all. It was like Alexander Landing to be in the same generation as him. It must be known that the #1 swordsman in the world, Sword Spirit Confusion, had once engaged in a pure swordsmanship battle with Durandar. That was when Sword Spirit Confusion was at its peak. At that time, Sword Spirit Confusion had just defeated the Maiden sword, who was known as the #1 swordswoman in swordsmanship, and the head of the Lun Yen family. These two people who stood at the pinnacle of swordsmanship and swordswoman's swordsmanship officially took the title of #1 swordsman in the world. Then, he went to challenge Durandar. He fought with Durandar for a whole 12 hours, and only narrowly defeated Durandar by a single move. At that time, Sword Spirit Confusion said a very famous sentence to the media who interviewed him. Lady Durandar may not be the best swordswoman in swordsmanship, but she is definitely the most difficult to deal with. She can use her 1,000 years of fighting experience to wear down her opponent. From this, it could be seen how powerful Durandar was in the eyes of the swordswomen in London, and how terrifying her swordsmanship was. That was a swordsmanship that even Sword Spirit Confusion almost defeated. But now, their hero and idol had fallen into a complete disadvantage, actually being suppressed by a swordswoman who had just turned 18 years old a few days ago. This was something they could not imagine. In the eyes of these ignorant swordsmen, Sword Spirit Confusion was slightly stronger than Durandar, and Gahan was stronger than Durandar, but Sword Spirit Confusion was the #1 swordsman in the world. Didn't this mean that Gahan's swordsmanship was already above Sword Spirit Confusion, and Gahan was the real #1 swordsman in the world? Please forgive the small hearts of these inexperienced youngsters, they simply could not admit this fact, but in their hearts they had faintly accepted this fact. The direct result of this was that when these swordsmen returned to their cities, an urban legend about a swordsman named Gahan began to spread among various cities. It was said that this person named Gahan was the real #1 swordsman in swordsmanship. Of course, people who heard this urban legend would disdainfully laugh it off, treating it as a joke. It wasn't until this person named Gohan truly appeared in the eyes of humans that they understood that sometimes urban legends were not just legends. Unlike those ordinary swordsmen who had no swordsmanship to speak of, Liuyan Ling understood that she had already discovered the reason why Durandar was at a disadvantage. She was very puzzled. When did Gohan become comparable to a famous swordsman? Of course, this was not important. What was important was that Liuyan Ling had a vague feeling that she might not be Gohan's opponent without using the billion swords art. This was something that Liuyan Ling could not accept. Why? Why is your strength so abnormal? After clashing with Gohan again, Durandar asked while gasping for breath. Ever since the Bumi sword spirit, she did not know how long it had been since she had felt this kind of pressure. This junior obtained some benefits from Zhetian Jiendi. Facing Durandar's question, Gohan could actually ignore it. But if he did so, his good impression of Durandar would inevitably be greatly reduced. What's more, Durandar's true spirit of chivalry made Gohan feel admiration. He did not want Durandar to fight him with doubts, but it was impossible for Gohan to tell the truth, so he could only push the blame onto Zhetian Jiendi. If Durandar had the ability, then go ask Zhetian Jiendi. Could it be that I Ching is really? Durandar suddenly thought of something, and her whole person suddenly fell into contemplation. She actually put down the sword in her hand, no longer blocking or attacking. This was a huge opportunity. As long as Gohan seized this opportunity to attack Durandar, Durandar would definitely fall to the ground and eat a dog eating mud. However, Gohan did not make a move. Just like Durandar, he put down the heavenly sword in his hand and quietly waited for Durandar to wake up from her contemplation. Hey, why didn't you make a move just now? Durandar woke up from her contemplation and saw Gohan standing in front of her with a sword in his hand, unexpectedly not taking advantage of this opportunity to attack her. If he had made a move just now, although she would not have lost, she would definitely have suffered a huge loss. We have a saying in the East, a gentleman does not take advantage of others when they are in a precarious situation. Sir, you have fallen into contemplation because of my words, so how could I make a move at this time? Gohan spoke with confidence, causing Durandar to look at him with more and more satisfaction. You are good. You are really good. Durandar actually directly put away her sword and patted Gohan's shoulder as she asked with a smile, Boy, do you think that you have already won just now? No, this junior swordsmanship is not as good as Sir's. It is only because Sir is limited by this trial array that this junior was able to suppress you. Outside of this trial array, even 10 juniors together would not be a match for Sir. Gohan's words carried a hint of flattery. If it was just a simple contest of swordsmanship, as long as 2 Gohan attacked Durandar at the same time, Durandar would definitely be defeated. As for 10 or so, that was purely flattery. However, Gohan's words clearly made Durandar very happy. She waved her hand and said, What do you mean by outside of the trial array, inside of the trial array? This is a fair duel, and in terms of swordsmanship, this junior has indeed lost to you. However, this is just swordsmanship. Let me ask you, can you block my Angels Eternal? Angels Eternal. This was Durandar's basic skill, and the specific effect of the skill was a mystery. However, the skills of the Sword Lady at the Immortal Sword tier, even if they were basic skills, were extremely terrifying skills. If one only relied on the power of Gohan, let alone taking a hit, even the slightest contact would cause Gohan to immediately be sent to a medical pod. However, Gohan was not afraid of these skills. This was the trial array Gohan's territory. As long as Gohan was willing, the power of the entire trial array could be used by Gohan at will. Using the trial array's power to offset Durandar's skill was a simple matter. However, Gohan naturally could not say this. He just shook his head sadly. How could this junior be able to block Sir's Angels Eternal? In fact, the moment Sir appeared, I knew that I had already lost. The battle just now was just to make my defeat more dignified. Good, dignified. Durandar had thoroughly fallen in love with Gohan, this dignified child. She closed her eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. After a short while, she suddenly opened her mouth. Your Majesty Dragon Sure, this subject has done her best, this subject has lost. She was just talking to her sword maiden, Dragon Sure Jiendi. As a sword maiden's clone, she could still get in touch with Dragon Sure Jiendi through the sword mark, even if she was trapped in the trial array at this time. After saying these short words, Durandar directly closed the communication with Dragon Sure Jiendi, and then looked at Gohan and finally said, "Good boy, I'm leaving. This time, you owe me a favor. Remember, when you become a famous sword maiden, you must come to London to find me. I have a good friend who is waiting for someone to save her. I think you are that person." Chapter 435. Who would have thought that Durandal would actually give up fighting with Gohan, and instead readily admit defeat? Of course, the reason was not because she thought that Gohan was a good young man. From her last sentence, it could be heard that Durandal actually had something to ask of Gohan. She seemed to be hoping that Gohan could help her save someone. This person seemed to be Durandal's friend. Durandal's friend? Gohan thought for a while, but could not think of any human that Durandal wanted him to help her save. With Durandal's status in the human world, as long as that friend did not commit a great crime of betraying humanity, even if it was killing a few hundred ordinary people or a few sword-bearers, the Sword Council would still give Durandal face. Could it be that Durandal's friend was trapped in an area that humans could not control? Gohan could not think of any clues, but there was no harm in befriending Durandal. From a certain point of view, Durandal was more important to humanity than Jiendi. If he forcibly took away the Emperor's sword this time, he would inevitably offend Long Sure Jiendi. With Durandal's help, he might be able to save himself a lot of trouble. Therefore, Gohan simply nodded and said to Durandal, "Gohan will remember your Excellency's words. Gohan will never forget it in his life. As long as Gohan's strength is enough, Gohan will definitely rescue your Excellency's friend." Good. Durandal's serious face actually showed a rather bright smile. As a model knight, Durandal was famous for not smiling. Seeing Durandal smile was even rarer than seeing an iron tree blossom. Listen in. Durandal did not finish her words when her face instantly changed and she muttered in a low voice, "They came so fast. Remember to come to London to find me. A knight's word cannot be taken back." After Durandal dropped these words, her body completely dissipated like smoke. This was a sign that the will of the Sword Maiden attached to the Power Seed had left. Once the will of the Sword Maiden attached to the Power Seed left, it meant that the Sword Maiden clone was completely destroyed. The moment Durandal's body dissipated, Gohan, who was in control of the entire trial array, suddenly felt a powerful force begin to exert itself on the entire trial array. That power was like a sharp drill, trying to drill through the defensive array of the training array and enter the interior of the training array. This power was very powerful. It was so powerful that the entire trial formation was operating at full speed. Even the power that had been accumulated for hundreds of years could not stop this power from invading the trial formation. After all, this power was concentrated at a single point, and the trial array's power had to take care of the entire array. Gohan controlled the trial formation to resist for more than 10 seconds before he started sweating all over and was in a daze. He knew that he could no longer stop this power from attacking. To be able to stop the formation set up by one of the strongest Jiendi in history, Jiendi, it could only be the power of an Emperor sword. As for the audience, they were all confused. What was going on? Why had Lord Durandal disappeared? Could it be that Lord Durandal had been defeated by this Yuzhong City swordsman? What kind of joke was this? Lord Durandal had failed before he could even use his skill? Although it seemed that Lord Durandal had been suppressed in terms of swordsmanship, as long as Lord Durandal used his skill, even if Gohan was the best swordsman in the world, he would still be easily defeated. It was impossible for Lord Durandal to lose. Reinhardt was even more confused. After summoning Durandal's sword Maiden clone, Reinhardt felt that he had already won. No swordsman could defeat Lord Durandal. However, Reinhardt had never thought that Durandal would actually be defeated. He had been defeated without even using a skill. There must be a dirty deal going on here. Reinhardt was dumbfounded and stupidly spat out such a sentence. If Durandal were to hear of this leading figure of London's sword-grade swordsman would probably experience what was called a real PY deal. What should I do? If I lose this duel, then at His Majesty's side. Reinhardt now understood the feeling of wanting to cry but having no tears. Not to mention that he had lost the duel. He had also wasted Long Jiandi's sword Maiden clone. His crime was simply unforgivable. He could no longer stay in London City. Although after releasing Durandal, things were completely out of his control. Everything was Durandal's own decision. Just when Reinhardt was secretly feeling sad, he suddenly saw Gohan's body tremble. Then, his mouth rapidly bulged like a fountain, spurting out an unknown amount of blood. Just like the character in the famous movie Before the Apocalypse, Stephen Chow and Gong Li, spurting out his own blood as if it was free. What happened? Reinhardt didn't even have the time to be shocked. He felt the originally bright space suddenly turn dark. The space above his head was completely distorted. Then, the space was forcibly torn apart, and a pair of giant hands reached out from the torn space. This is the giant void hand. Reinhardt was dumbfounded. What kind of plot was this? Why did a pair of giant void hands suddenly appear here? The giant void hand was an ability that only sword bearers of immortal sword grade and above could use. This was also the reason why Gohan desperately wanted to worship an immortal sword-grade sword-bearer as his master. He hoped that when he was about to lose his life, the giant void hand could save his life. Since the giant void hand could save people, naturally, it could also kill people. At this time, this pair of giant void hands broke through the void for the purpose of killing people. No, to be precise, it was to snatch things. Give it to me. From the void came a somewhat illusory, somewhat hoarse, yet full of domineering and irrefutable voice. That is not something you should get. Long sure. Gohan gritted his teeth and spat out such a name. As soon as Durandal left, this giant hand appeared. Even a fool could guess that the owner of this giant hand was Reinhardt and the master behind Durandal, Long Jiandi. Seeing that his killing move had failed, he could only do it himself. Give it to me, don't make me do it myself. The giant hand stretched out a finger and placed it on Gohan's forehead. This was just an index finger, but it was a bit thicker than Gohan's head. Gohan could feel a destructive power from this finger. In the face of this power, even if Gohan used all his cards, it would still be impossible for him to resist this power. Just now, Gohan had mobilized all the power of the trial array he could muster to defend himself, but the result was still easily broken by Long Jiandi's giant hand. Gohan knew that he might not be able to pass this hurdle, and he might not be able to keep this Emperor sword. Pa! Gohan grabbed the Emperor's sword in his hand, trembling as he prepared to hand it over to Long Jiandi. People under the eaves had no choice but to bow their heads. He, Gohan, was not a person who would waste time on an insignificant problem. This time, he was strongly oppressed by Long Jiandi. If he still wanted to mix in the human world, if he still wanted Yuzhong City to receive the protection of Long Jiandi at the critical moment, then he must endure this matter and hand over the Emperor's sword. Today's humiliation, I will engrave it in my heart. In the future, when I ascend the throne, I will make you regret today's matter. Gohan's heart was bleeding, but what else could he do? He could only tell himself in his heart that this time's humiliation, he, Gohan, would definitely repay it in the future. Wait, the 29th generation descendant of the Liunian aristocratic clan, Liunian Ling, greets your majesty Long Shi. Just as Gohan was about to hand over the Emperor's sword, Liunian Ling suddenly appeared in front of Gohan. She cupped her fists and performed a standard etiquette to Long Shi Jiendi. So, it's Ling. It seems that you are all right. The lads of our city of London have successfully rescued you. This uncle is relieved. Long Shi Jiendi said flatly. Although he said that he was relieved, in fact, there was no trace of concern in his words. Humph, there is no need for our friends from City of London to rescue me. The one who really rescued Ling is the swordsman of Yuzhong City, Gohan. Your Majesty Long Shi, if you want to thank someone, thank him. Liunian Ling said bluntly, causing Long Shi Jiendi to be speechless for a long time. Long Shi Jiendi's silence did not mean that Liunian Ling had nothing to say. She continued, Ling heard that this time, because of Ling's matter, the sword-bearers of the 8 major base cities have come together. Ling is deeply honored and grateful. Later, when Ling returns to the Liunian aristocratic clan, she will definitely give you a generous gift to thank you for today's kindness. Liunian Ling first thanked these sword-bearers of the 8 major base cities. In fact, they did not want to rescue Liunian Ling. Their fundamental purpose was actually the Emperor's sword in Gohan's hands. Their original plan was that if Long Shi Jiendi paid attention to his table manners and still wanted to save face, he would at most send a sword Maiden's clone over. It was not like they did not have a trump card. But now, Long Shi Jiendi was completely shameless. He even used the giant void hand. This should be the ability to exert 1/10 of Jiendi's strength. What trump card would not work in front of a living Jiendi? There was no need to think about this Emperor's sword. Except for Yanjing City, which also had a Jiendi behind it, no one else could think about it. However, since Liunian Ling had attributed the purpose of the sword-bearers of the various base cities coming here to her, she must have her own purpose. Sure enough, Liunian Ling continued, since you have rescued Ling, the matter has been settled. Your Majesty Long Shi does not need to trouble you anymore. Your Majesty can go back now. In the future, Ling will definitely thank you in person. This was directly driving Long Shi Jiendi away. Liunian Ling was really outspoken. Fortunately, she had the Liunian family behind her, so Long Shi Jiendi did not dare to casually pinch her. If it was another person, even if it was another descendant of the Jiendi family, Long Shi Jiendi would still be able to deal with him. I have not seen you for a few years, but Ling has developed a pair of good teeth. Our coming here has nothing to do with you. It is only related to this sword. You can withdraw. Don't hurt the harmony between us and the Liunian family. For the sake of this sword, the Dragon Lion Sword Emperor had already thrown away his last shred of dignity. Chapter 436. So your Majesty Long Shi wants this sword. Liunian Ling rolled her eyes. Of course there is no problem, but your Majesty may not know that this sword has now become a trophy of a duel. Before the end of the duel, this sword enjoys the protection of the duel rules. No one can touch it. Does your Majesty want to violate the duel rules? The duel rules were rules that had been adopted by humans for hundreds of years, and were recognized by all humans and sword-bearers, not to mention that there were people from the Liunian clan present. Although with Jiendi's strength, no one would really argue with Long Shi Jiendi if he forcibly broke the duel rules, but once this matter was spread out, Long Shi Jiendi's reputation among humans would instantly turn into a pile of mud, and his future record in the history books would not be so glorious. This might become a stain on Long Shi Jiendi's life. Big shots like Jiendi valued their face the most and hoped that they could be immortalized through the ages. Therefore, even Long Shi Jiendi did not dare to blatantly violate the duel rules. Liunian Ling's idea was very simple. She wanted to contact Haotian Jiendi and let Haotian Jiendi intervene, lest the Emperor's sword really be taken away by the City of London. However, it was very troublesome to contact Haotian Jiendi in the trial array. Liu Ling needed time. As long as the duel continued and delayed enough time for Liu Ling to contact Haotian Jiendi, the ownership of the Emperor's sword was still unknown. So there is a duel here. Yes, the duel rules cannot be violated. Then I will wait until the duel is over. Long Shi Jiandi's voice buzzed. Liu Ling breathed a sigh of relief. She immediately sent a message to Gohan, telling Gohan to hold back during the duel with Reinhardt. The longer the better. It's useless. In less than a second, Gohan replied to Liu Ling with such a message, which made Liu Ling very angry. What do you mean by useless? Is he looking down on me for coming up with a way to stall for time? I admit defeat. Reinhardt lost. After a few seconds, Reinhardt suddenly raised his hands and put the red hilt sword on the ground, which meant that Reinhardt admitted defeat to Gohan. Don't you still have an ancient sword-grade sword mistress? Why did you admit defeat? Liu Ling was anxious, but she quickly reacted. This was Long Shi Jiandi's order for Reinhardt to admit defeat. Long Shi Jiandi had clearly seen that Liu Ling wanted to stall for time, so he ordered Reinhardt to admit defeat. Sure enough, Long Shi Jiandi quickly said, now that the duel is over, this Emperor's sword is no longer under the protection of the duel rules. Give this sword to us, and us will reward you with a death exemption edict. This reward is already enough. Long Shi Jiandi once again stretched out his hand towards Gohan. In order to block Liu Ling's mouth, he also specifically expressed his willingness to grant Gohan a death exemption edict. The death exemption edict was something that could only be issued by Jiandi. Don't get me wrong, it was not to let Gohan ignore the law and avoid death once, but when Gohan received a fatal attack, he would turn into an amber, wrap Gohan inside, and then travel through the void to return to Jiandi's side. It was the strongest life-saving prop. The life-saving effect of the death exemption edict was even better than that of the giant void hand. After all, the giant void hand still needed a certain amount of time to be channeled. In case the sword-bearer could not survive this short channeling time, then they would die. But the death exemption edict was different. It belonged to the type that could be triggered immediately. As long as one encountered a life-threatening danger, it would automatically be triggered. Its life-saving effect was simply heaven-defying. Such a thing was naturally very precious. Jiandi could only make one copy a year. Except for his closest people, he would not bestow it at all. Even Liu Ling only had one copy of Haotian Jiandi. Long Shi Jiandi had even taken out the death exemption edict. One could well imagine his determination towards the Emperor's sword. Moreover, in terms of morality and justice, Long Shi Jiandi had nothing to accuse him of. The other party had used the death exemption edict to exchange for it. For Gohan, it was absolutely not a loss. A person cannot be insatiably greedy. Seeing that Gohan was still hesitating, Long Shi Jiandi snorted, and the whole space began to tremble along with his cold snort. A coercion directly pressed down on Gohan's back, causing Gohan to stagger. One of his legs could not support him, and he directly knelt on the ground. Gohan could not say anything. Just when he was ready to completely accept his fate, suddenly, another powerful force began to impact the defense of the training array. The strength of this force was unexpectedly on par with the power of Long Shi Jiandi. It's Haotian Jiandi. Gohan's mind cleared up. He knew that this was Haotian Jiandi's giant hand. Jiandi had finally arrived. Gohan promptly controlled the power of the training array to disperse, allowing Haotian Jiandi's power to directly enter the training array without any hindrance. It tore open the void on the other side, and directly collided with Long Shi Jiandi's giant hand. Heavens, another giant void hand has come! A onlooker exclaimed. This is Haotian Jiandi's giant void hand. Kanzu above, the two great Jiandi of our human race have actually arrived. This is definitely the biggest news of the year. Another onlooker added. They had never thought that they could actually see the situation of two human Jiendi confronting each other across the void. Being able to personally experience such a big event was enough for them to brag about for a lifetime. Big brother Haotian, you came really fast. Seeing that Haotian Jiendi had already arrived, Longsure Jiendi's voice became a little low. With Haotian Jiendi here, he could no longer cover the sky with one hand. Fortunately, this training array does not seem to reject this old man's power. Second brother, you just consumed a lot of power to break through the training array. A long time ago, in order to make Jiendi close to each other, under the initiative of Kanzu, all Jiendi had to burn yellow paper and become sworn brothers. According to the time when they became Jiendi, they would call each other big brother, second brother, and so on. Although this sounded a bit ridiculous, it was undeniable that under the name of brothers, the disputes between Jiendi had indeed decreased a lot. Opening the way for big brother is what a little brother should do. Longsure Jiendi's tone was very strange. In order to break through the defense of the training array, he had consumed a lot of the power of the giant void hand. Although it was not much, but in a confrontation between two Jiendi, even a little less power was a fatal thing. Now he had naturally fallen into a disadvantageous position. If he really fought with Haotian Jiendi, he would lose more than he would win. Then it's been hard on you, second brother. Haotian Jiendi's tone was very gentle. There is no need to speak any insinuations between us brothers. Originally, I did not have much desire for this emperor's sword in Yanjing City. After all, I already have enough emperor's swords. I did not rush here immediately, which represents my attitude. Then why did big brother come here? Longsure Jiendi coldly snorted. Because I did not expect that this sword was really that sword. Haotian paused, and his voice became extremely serious. He did not even address Longsure as his younger brother. Longsure, this is our Huaxia human clan's most precious sword. I will never let you take it to London City. You should understand the significance of this sword to our Huaxia people. I know. Hearing Haotian Jiendi's words, Longsure Jiendi also became serious. But big brother, I Longsure also have half of the Huaxia blood in my body. My London City also uses Chinese as its language and takes Huaxia as its ancestor. 2/3 of our London City is of Huaxia blood. Don't tell me that London City is not qualified to inherit this sword? Haotian Jiendi was silent. Chen Shuang Jiendi, the founder of London City, was also a Huaxia person. Most of the earliest citizens of London City were also of Huaxia blood. In the beginning, London City was even intended to be called Zhenyuan City. Just the word Zhenyuan alone showed the original flavor of London City's establishment. However, for various reasons, London City eventually separated from Huaxia. In the end, it still used the original name of London as the city's name. It absorbed a large number of English survivors and became a base city belonging to England. However, its relationship with Huaxia blood could not be cut off at all. Compared with the already sparse English blood, London City was closer to Huaxia blood. How about this? This sword will be temporarily kept by Yanjing City. Let's talk about its ownership when we meet. After a moment of silence, Haotian Jiendi proposed such a solution. I refuse. Longsure Jiendi sneered. If the sword is in the hands of Yanjing City, do I still have a chance to get it? If you want to have a meeting, that's fine. But it will be temporarily kept by London City. We'll discuss it later. How about it, big brother? Sigh. Haotian Jiendi sighed and stopped talking. A giant hand pressed directly toward Longsure Jiendi's position. This was the rhythm of a direct attack. Longsure Jiendi was not to be outdone, and the two giant hands collided. Because the two Jiendi's real bodies were not here, they could only rely on the power of the giant hands to collide with each other. This was the most direct collision of power. There was no fancy swordsmanship in it, and it was a competition of the purest strength. The The two gigantic hands kept colliding against each other. The wind pressure generated from their collisions blew the surrounding sword-bearers into the nearby walls. It was as if they had been nailed to the wall, unable to move at all. Jiandi's strength could be seen at a glance from this. If one was not an emperor's sword, one would always be just an ant in front of an emperor's sword. Even if it was an immortal sword-grade sword wielder, it was just a relatively large ant. In more than 3 minutes, the two giant hands collided no less than 100 times. It seemed that Haotian Jiandi was gradually gaining the upper hand. After all, he did not consume any power to break through the defense of the smelting trial array. It was because of such a small advantage that Haotian Jiandi had already gained the upper hand. "Big brother, you forced me to do this." Suddenly, Longsure Jiandi uttered such a sentence, and then the void not far from Longsure Jiandi's giant hand was once again torn open. Another giant hand forcibly tore open the void and arrived at the smelting trial array. "Longsure, you're crazy." Seeing two hands appear at the same time, Haotian Jiandi knew that he was going to lose this battle. He had only gained a little upper hand. Once both of Longsure Jiandi's hands appeared at the same time, unless he also called for a second hand, he would not be able to win against Longsure. Not to mention whether Longsure would give Haotian time to call for a second hand. Did Haotian Jiandi really have the courage to call for a second hand? Chapter 437. Whether it was Jiandi or a sword immortal, generally speaking, they could only use one giant void hand at the same time, and after using it they would fall into a period of decline. This period of decline was about a week to a month for a sword immortal, but for Jiandi it was only about a day. Therefore, the sword Tharch didn't have to worry about using the void hand. It was just one day. But if he used two giant void hands at the same time, then what awaited Jiandi would not be as simple as a few days of decline, which required Jiandi's lifespan to trigger. To use the second giant void hand, Jiandi's own blood and qi must be consumed, which was almost equivalent to lifespan for humans. Longsure Jiandi was young, and his blood and qi were vigorous. Using the second giant void hand would probably consume about a month of his lifespan, which was already an astonishing amount of time. As for Haotian Jiandi, he was already old and did not have many years to live, so he was already in a state of insufficient blood and qi. If he forced his body to use the second giant void hand, it would not be a month of lifespan, but a year of lifespan. Therefore, it was absolutely impossible for Haotian Jiandi to use the second giant void hand. Even if he was willing to use it, human beings would not. They were about to enter the difficult sword era, and if Jiandi could live one more day, it would be one more hope for human beings. How could Haotian Jiandi waste a year to compete with human beings? When Haotian Jiandi saw Longsure Jiandi use the second giant void hand, he knew that he had lost. He retracted his giant void hand and could only say with infinite emotion, "It's good to be young." This sentence contained the bitterness of the clear sky sword emperor, and one could imagine how much bitterness it contained. Just when everyone, including Gohan himself, thought that the overall situation was settled and that the emperor's sword could not escape from Longsure Jiandi's hand, something even more bizarre happened. Gohan only felt that the golden emperor's sword in his hand began to shake violently. At first, he thought that Longsure Jiandi was forcibly taking the emperor's sword from his hand, but he immediately discovered that it was actually the emperor's sword itself that was shaking. Soon, an electric shock-like attack made Gohan's palm numb. Gohan's tightly clenched hand unconsciously loosened, and the golden Jiandi slowly floated in the air, just in the middle of Longsure Jiandi and Haotian Jiandi's confrontation. What's going on? Not only did these sword-bearers not understand, but even Longsure Jiandi and Haotian Jiandi, the two supremes of mankind, could not understand the reaction of this emperor's sword. Their control of power was meticulous, and they immediately discovered that the power that made the emperor's sword float in the air did not originate from the outside, but from its own power inside the emperor's sword. This made people unable to understand. They had never heard of a sword maiden without a sword-bearer moving on its own. Long Shi Jiandi and Haotian Jiandi silently pondered over the Emperor's sword suspended in the middle of them, trying to figure out what was going on inside. Unfortunately, they could not figure out the reason. After a while, Long Shi Jiandi finally could not bear it anymore. Although he was exuberant, maintaining his 2 giant hands was consuming his lifespan, and he could not afford to drag it on. Therefore, Long Shi Jiandi's 2 giant hands simultaneously stretched towards the golden Emperor's sword in front of him, wanting to grasp it in his own hands. On the other side, Haotian Jiandi's giant hands hesitantly moved, and finally chose to give up. If he tried to snatch it, it would only be a waste of his own power. Seeing that the Emperor's sword was about to fall into the hands of Long Shi Jiandi, an earth-shattering sentence, a scene that Long Shi Jiandi would never forget for the rest of his life, an enduring topic that everyone would never get tired of, and a story that would be written in history textbooks and become a beautiful story, joke, for thousands of years, happened. This was a very clean and nimble sentence. This was a concise and clear sentence that went straight to the heart. This sentence was not elegant, but it was indeed the people's mantra. This sentence was not civilized, but it was more powerful than any sword, spear, sword, and halberd. This sentence only had 5 short words, but it could make anyone go crazy. This sentence was, "I'll *ck your mother." This sentence was really loud and deafening. Everyone on the scene was shocked by this sentence, and their eardrums were hurting, and they were almost directly deafened. After their ears recovered with great difficulty, everyone began to guess who the person who had just said that sentence was. In fact, there was nothing to guess. As for the source of the voice, it could be heard at a glance. Everyone looked directly at the position of the Golden Emperor's sword. That earth-shattering sentence had come from there, from the body of the Emperor's sword. However, everyone could not understand. Why could this sword speak? This was not logical. Unless she already had her own sword wielder, it was impossible for the sword lady to speak. Therefore, everyone's gaze instantly shifted to Gohan. This sword had never left Gohan's control from the beginning to the end. If there was someone who was synchronized with this Emperor's sword, it would undoubtedly be Gohan. In the face of everyone's gaze, Gohan chose to remain silent. There was nothing to explain about this kind of thing. Whoever would believe it would be an idiot. That's right, there was another question. Whose mother did the Emperor's sword want to *ck? The people on the scene were not idiot. Therefore, this thought only flashed past in a flash. Their attention returned to the Emperor's sword. "Goddess, you've already awakened." Haotian Jiandi was the first to break the silence. He spoke to the Emperor's sword respectfully. The Emperor's sword did not reply. "Goddess, I am Long Shi Jiandi. I hope to invite Goddess to stay with the Mayor of London. I will definitely meet all your requirements." This time, it was Long Shi Jiandi's turn to speak. "Idiot." This time, the Emperor's sword did not remain silent. It gave Long Shi Jiandi a resounding answer. Incidentally, it also clarified a question about whose mother was the Emperor's sword *king just now. This made everyone's itchy mood a lot more comfortable. The Emperor's sword was indeed the Emperor's sword. Could even curse people like this. "Goddess, please be careful with your words." If Long Shi Jiandi were here, then his expression at this time would certainly be very interesting. It was estimated that the expression of someone eating *t would be just like this. "Be careful with your mother's words." Another slap landed on Long Shi Jiandi's face. This time, Long Shi Jiandi really couldn't bear it. His 2 giant hands, mixed with Long Shi Jiandi's anger, grabbed towards the Emperor's sword with lightning speed. He wanted to take this Emperor's sword back and have a good chat with her about the principles of being a sword mother. Unfortunately, the Emperor's sword was not to be trifled with. Looking at the giant hands of Long Shi Jiandi, the patterns of the sun, moon, stars, mountains and rivers on the body of the Emperor's sword suddenly began to move. The next moment, a huge red sun suddenly flew out from the body of the Emperor's sword and directly collided with Long Jiandi's giant hands. Long Jiandi's giant hands didn't care about this red sun at all. Just like swatting a fly, it wanted to swat this red sun away. But something that Long Jiandi had never expected happened. His giant hands slightly touched the red sun, and the flames on the red sun quickly ignited on the giant hands. Long Jiandi's giant hands were composed of natural liquefied gas. In a flash, the entire giant hands were completely ignited by the red sun. The raging flames burned in the air, and the temperature of the whole room instantly rose by hundreds of degrees. Everyone felt as if they had entered a flaming hell, and their bodies were being crazily roasted. So hot, so hot. I'm going to faint. The sword-bearers of the sword rank were completely unprepared for this heat wave. In less than 2 or 3 seconds, the clothes of these people were completely soaked in sweat. Some of them had already suffered from severe heatstroke and directly fainted on the ground, losing their will. Only Guhan, who had received the blessing of the 2 sword maidens at the same time, had a good fire resistance. Therefore, he didn't collapse under the high temperature. Instead, he used the heavenly sword to support his body, and his brain and consciousness were still conscious. But there was only one Guhan. The sword-bearers of the sword rank here didn't have any fire resistance, so they all collapsed from heatstroke one after another. If this situation continued, it wouldn't take long, but within 30 seconds, about half of the sword-bearers here would die. Not good. At this critical moment, Haotian Jiandi was still concerned about the backs of these people with great potential. His giant hands immediately split into hundreds of small hands, which covered the bodies of the sword-bearers who were being roasted, isolating them from the heat that could make people go crazy. With Haotian Jiandi's protection, Guhan, who had begun to feel dizzy, instantly became spirited. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Guhan clasped his hands together in gratitude. "No need. Protect yourselves." Haotian Jiandi's voice rang in Guhan's ears. This voice was very low, and it seemed that he was speaking to Guhan alone. This made Guhan's favorable impression of Haotian Jiandi rise a lot. The flames in the sky burned for about 3 minutes, and the nearby stone walls gradually turned red from the heat. Long Jiandi let out an unwilling roar, but he still couldn't stop his giant hands from burning, and could only dissipate the entire giant hands. Once the giant hands dissipated, the flames also lost their source of combustion, and disappeared together with them. This large area of flames came and went very quickly. If it weren't for the extremely high temperature still remaining in the air, people would have thought that nothing had happened just now. "Your Majesty, please calm down. This old man will no longer intervene in this matter. It's all up to Your Majesty." Seeing Long Jiandi disappear, Haotian Jiandi also expressed his attitude. Motherf **Ker. Leaving behind such a last curse, the Emperor's sword slowly fell from the sky, and finally returned to Guhan's hands. Everything returned to normal. Chapter 438. What's the situation at the Mei Ling mountain range? Sword Immortal Baiju sat down on a chair, exhausted. He could only sleep for 4 hours a day. The large amount of work he had to do was taking up a lot of his time. Chairman, the Mei Ling mountain range has been completely occupied by Yuan Ko. However, because of your arrangements, the sword-bearers we left at the Mei Ling mountain range have all retreated safely. Not a single sword-bearer was lost. The person in charge of the intelligence department reported to Zhu Wudao. 3 days ago, Yuan Ko from Fort Yuyang, who had been quiet for a long time, suddenly moved out. The target of these Yuan Ko was very clear: the Mei Ling mountain range. The mighty army consisted of tens of thousands of normal Yuan Ko, more than 10 Nether and Meteor Yuan Ko, and 2 U-Realm Yuan Ko. If they wanted to destroy this Yuan Ko army, they would probably have to mobilize all of Yuzhang City's sword-bearers. However, according to the investigation team, There were at least 5 Realm Yuan Ko in Fort Yuyang. Who knew if this was Yuan Ko's plan to lure the humans out of the fortified city and then destroy the humans' main force in the field? After thinking about it, Zhu Wudao decided to give up on the Mei Ling mountain range. He let the sword-bearers stay at the Mei Ling mountain range to return to Yuzhang City through the quantum teleportation formation. He also reduced the humans' security perimeter from 300 kilometers to 150 kilometers. This way, the sword-bearers in charge of investigation and security were a lot safer, but the humans' grasp of the surrounding area's intelligence was greatly reduced. What happened after that? Did Yuan Ko do anything? Zhu Wudao continued to ask. Reporting, Chairman. After the Yuan Ko army occupied the Mei Ling mountain range, they did not do anything else. Instead, they gathered in the Mei Ling mountain range. There are simply too many Yuan Ko there. Our investigation team did not dare to go near at all. We don't know what's going on there either. The person in charge of intelligence said helplessly. We must find out why Yuan Ko wants to occupy the Mei Ling mountain range. According to the records of previous great invasions, Yuan Ko would either suddenly appear outside the city and launch an attack on the humans, or occupy the Yeyang fortress as a base to launch a protracted war against the humans. Although the Merlin mountain range had been occupied by Yuan Ko before, it was only to eliminate the sword-bearers guarding it. Yuan Ko had never amassed so many troops in the Merlin mountain range like this, and then shut himself in as if he wanted to build a Fort Merlin there. Gu Wudao's intuition told him that there must be a problem. Yes, I will order the Sky-Piercing Swords reconnaissance team to investigate the situation in the Plum Ridge mountain range, the person in charge of intelligence said quickly. The Sky-Piercing Sword team. Hearing this name, Zhu Wudao showed a distressed expression. They suffered heavy losses during the last reconnaissance of the Yuyang fortress. Have they recovered yet? Did you arrange a break for them? Chairman, you don't know this, but for the past few days, Sky-Piercing Swords team has been asking me to fight them. They say that they have rested for 10 days, and their bones are about to break. They want to go to war immediately and gather the latest information for Yuzhang City. The person in charge's face was also filled with emotion. He was not lying. Although every member of the Sky-Piercing Sword team had overdrawn their lifespan by an average of 30 years, and if they were to go out again, it was very likely that they would face death. However, these heroes were still willing to make such a sacrifice for the safety of Yuzhang City. Heroes. They are all heroes. Zhu Wudao did not know what else to say other than the word, heroes. Tell them that if anything happens to them, Yuzhang City will never forget their contributions. If they have descendants, give them the right to live in the core area for 3 generations. If they don't have descendants, collect their sperm or eggs, find a suitable partner, and create a descendant for them. Also, guarantee the right to live in the core area for 3 generations. Do you understand? Yes, I will convey your words to them. This way, those heroes will have nothing to worry about, the person in charge said. That's all. Is there any other important information? Zhu Wudao felt sleepy. If there was no important information, he would go to sleep for a while. He had been working for 20 hours straight. There's no special news about the battlefield, but there's the latest news about Chongyang Mountain, the person in charge said. News about Chongyang Mountain. Zhu Wudao was energized. Did the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit send us a message? If he was most worried about the safety of Yuzhang City, then his son, Ku Rokin, was the second most worried. The team from Yuzhang City had been in Chongyang Mountain for 18 days, and he had not received any news from there. He did not know what the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit was doing. No, the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit didn't send us the news. The news came from the Haotian Palace in Yanjing City. The person in charge hesitated for a while. The Homie Sword Spirit in Yanjing City said that the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit left Chongyang Mountain early because he was worried about the situation in Yuzhang City. What is this guy doing? Didn't I tell him that our team is not allowed to leave Chongyang Mountain until they come out of the trial formation? Why did he come back? Did my words go in one ear and out the other? Although Zhu Wudao was angry on the surface, he was really touched. Knowing that Yuzhang City was in such a crisis, the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit still came back without hesitation. This meant that the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit valued Yuzhang City more than his own life. This was a good son of Yuzhang City. Where is the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit? Tell him to come and see me. Since he's back, I have a mission for him. Everyone in Yuzhang City is very busy now. I can't let him be alone. Zhu Wudao finally had a smile on his face. What Zhu Wudao did not expect was that, after hearing his question, the person in charge of intelligence began to panic. This was not normal behavior. Did something happen? What happened? Tell me. Zhu Wudao slammed the table hard. President, after I learned that the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit had returned, I checked all the records of Yuzhang City. There was no record of the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit returning to Yuzhang City. We then asked Bat to investigate, but there was no record of the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit's personal terminal in Yuzhang City. We basically concluded that the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit did not return to Yuzhang City. At least, he did not enter Yuzhang City. The person in charge quickly told him everything he knew. What? The Eagle Cat hasn't returned yet. Zhu Wudao was stunned. If the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit returned to Yuzhang City on the day he entered Chongyang Mountain, then he had left Chongyang Mountain 18 days ago. Where was he? It was only a 5-day journey from Yuzhang City to Chongyang Mountain. It had been 18 days now. Shouldn't he have returned to Yuzhang City? Could it be that the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit is in danger? This thought suddenly popped into Zhu Wudao's mind. The entire Yuzhang City was surrounded by Yuan-Ko. Only the road in the direction of Fujian was still under the control of humans. If the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit was unfortunately attacked by Yuan-Ko on the way back, then the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit would be. Is there any other news? Zhu Wudao took 3 deep breaths to calm himself down. Is there any other clue about the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit? Even if it's just a small clue, report it to me. Yes, our people just went to Yanjing City to look for reinforcements. One of their famed sword-level sword-bearers said that he found a very tragic battlefield 13 days ago. The marks on the battlefield were not left by a famed sword-level, a flood dragon-level, or a dragon-level Yuan-Ko. Our preliminary judgment is that there was a battle between a spirit sword-level sword-bearer and a meteor-level Yuan-Ko. Also, he found a damaged hover bus there. I've already asked about the wreckage of the bus. There's a 90% chance that it was the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit's hover bus. The person in charge reported. As expected, they encountered Yuan-Ko. That Eagle Cat. Why did you come back? What are you doing? Zhu Wudao angrily pounded on the table. This table, which had been specially strengthened by the dimensional crystal mine, could not withstand such violent pounding and was directly smashed into pieces. This was the 7th table that Zhu Wudao had destroyed in the past 20 days. Don't be angry, Chairman. The sword-bearer said that after he saw the battlefield, he specifically searched within a 10-kilometer radius. In the end, he did not find any corpses, nor did he find the broken remains of the Sword Lady. At least the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit did not die in that battle. The person in charge hurriedly reported a piece of good news, which calmed Zhu Wudao's anxious heart a lot. Arrange an additional task for the sky-piercing sword team. If possible, ask them to help find information about the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit. However, whether the news is good or bad, and whether the Eagle Cat is dead or alive, they are not allowed to do anything. They are only responsible for gathering information, and nothing else, understand? Zhu Wudao said sternly. The sky-piercing sword team was good at scouting, but their combat ability was extremely weak. They could not even defeat an ordinary Yuan-Ko of the same level. If the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit was captured, it would definitely be closely guarded by Yuan Ko. If the sky-piercing sword team attacked, only death awaited them. Yes, I will remind the sky-piercing sword team. The person in charge nodded. Chairman, there is still some news about Chongyang Mountain. Would you like to continue listening? Tell me, what happened to Chongyang Mountain? What happened to our Yuzhong City team? Also, why did the news come from Yanjing City's Haotian Palace? Shouldn't this kind of thing be conveyed to us by the Yanjing City Sword Committee? Because this news was personally told by His Majesty Haotian. At the mention of Haotian Jiendi, the person in charge revealed a look of admiration and joy. His Majesty Haotian said that the Emperor's sword has appeared, and it is now in the hands of Yuzhong City. There really is the Emperor's sword there. Zhu Wudao was stunned. And it is in the hands of Yuzhong City? Yes, this is absolutely true. His Majesty Haotian said it himself. There is absolutely no falsehood, the person in charge said with certainty. This eagle cat. Zhu Wudao's face was full of regret. If the Emperor's sword was lost on the way, even if he died 10,000 times, he would not be able to face the ancestors of Yuzhong City. *CK his grandmother. Alright, Zhu Wudao's attitude towards the eagle cat sword spirit had changed 360 degrees. I dialed correctly. Chapter 439. Young man, what's your name? When all the smoke had dissipated and Long Shi Jiandi's giant hands were completely anchored, Haotian Jiandi's hundreds of giant hands merged back into one and placed them in front of Gohan, asking kindly. This lowly one, Yuzhong City's treasure sword-grade swordsman Gohan, pays respect to your Majesty Haotian. May your Majesty live for 10,000 years. Gohan immediately knelt down on one knee and said to Haotian Jiendi. Gohan. Haotian Jiandi's voice was obviously stuck, and he didn't say a word for a long time. This made Gohan speculate in his heart that he didn't know what had gone wrong. He seemed to have offended Long Shi Jiendi, so he couldn't offend Haotian Jiendi as well. Grandpa Haotian, you finally came, he. Ling pays respect to Grandpa Haotian. Liuyan Ling suddenly moved to Gohan's side, leaned on Gohan's shoulder, and also saluted Haotian Jiandi's giant hands. However, Liuyan Ling didn't call him Your Majesty, but called him Grandpa, which was more intimate. Obviously, the relationship between Liuyan Ling and Haotian Jiendi was much closer. It wasn't surprising, as the descendants of the Lunyan clan had a close relationship with Jiendi. This lowly one, XX City's treasure sword-grade swordsman XXX, pays respect to your Majesty Haotian. May your Majesty live for 10,000 years. Seeing Liuyan Ling kneel down, the rest of the treasure sword-grade swordsmen suddenly came to a realization and knelt in front of Haotian Jiandi's giant hands. Just now, when Long Shi Jiandi's giant hands appeared, the scene was so shocking that they forgot the basic etiquette after seeing Jiendi. It was really too shameful. Fortunately, this time, Gohan and Liuyan Ling remembered, or they would have forgotten about it again. Rise. Haotian Jiendi obviously didn't have much interest in other people's greetings. All his attention was on Liuyan Ling. You little girl, you've caused so much trouble because of you. You even called me over. Tell me, how are you going to thank your Grandpa Haotian? Hearing Liuyan Ling's words, Haotian Jiandi's attitude clearly eased. Grandpa, don't be angry. I'll bring you a bottle of 2016 Maodai from my house for you. I guarantee that it's the best bottle. Fleeting Lin chuckled. TSK, the Fleeting Time family was indeed capable. Maodai in 2016. It was already 992 years ago. What would it taste like? It's already 992 years ago. What would it taste like? Only Liuyan Ling had this kind of old thing. If it were other families, they wouldn't have the ability to protect it. To be able to preserve a bottle of white wine for almost 1,000 years, this was not something that could be achieved with ordinary technology. Okay, Grandpa will wait for your Maodai. Haotian Jiendi laughed. Ling, come back quickly. You don't know, when your old man went missing, he mentioned your name to me 7 or 8 times a day. Grandpa's ears were almost broken by him. Okay, after we get out of here, Ling will go back to Yanjing City. Liuyan Ling nodded vigorously. It seemed that she was really homesick. Well, very good. Haotian Jiandi's giant hand covered Liuyan Ling's head and gently stroked it. He was really like a kind and amiable grandpa who took pity on his granddaughter. Ling, Grandpa has one more thing to ask you. When the clear sky sword emperor said this, his tone suddenly jumped out with a hint of playfulness. What is your relationship with this Gu Han kid? Grandpa doesn't remember you being so close to a boy. Shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand. Grandpa. Liuyan Ling showed a rare shyness on her face. Don't I always sit on Grandpa's lap? Isn't Grandpa a boy? Ha! Haotian Jiandi laughed heartily. This kid is interesting. When he comes to Yanjing City in the future, bring him to Grandpa. Grandpa will help you see if this kid is worthy of the daughter of Liuyan family. Tisich, ignore Grandpa. His mouth stinks. Although Liuyan Ling said that Haotian Jiandi's mouth stinks, she did not have any intention of rejecting Haotian Jiandi's help. Yes, her intention was very clear. Next, Liuyan Ling and Haotian Jiandi had a conversation about family matters. Naturally, Guhan could not interrupt. His eyes wandered slowly and suddenly saw Song Yifei kneeling there with a sad expression. Her eyes were filled with sorrow. What's wrong with her? Guhan felt an inexplicable pain in his heart when he saw Song Yifei's expression. He wanted to go up and ask her, but Haotian Jiandi was still in front of him. If he left now, it would be too disrespectful to Haotian Jiandi. After hesitating for a while, Guhan still did not move. He continued kneeling in front of Haotian Jiandi. At this time, Song Yifei was indeed in a state of sadness and bitterness. Originally, the relationship between her and Liuyan Ling had gradually eased. It could even be said that they had become good friends. However, when she saw how close Liuyan Ling and Haotian Jiandi were, and how Haotian Jiandi and Liuyan Ling were like grandfather and grandson, Song Yifei felt a deep sense of inferiority. Compared to Liuyan Ling, who was the eldest daughter of the Liuyan family, what was she? Why did Guhan like her? Especially when she heard that even Haotian Jiandi teased Liuyan Ling, and even invited Guhan to see him because of Liuyan Ling, Song Yifei's emotions were on the verge of breaking down. If Guhan and Liuyan Ling were together, he could directly fly to the court and become Jiandi's guest, the future son-in-law of the Liuyan family. Seeing Guhan and Liuyan Ling kneeling side by side, Song Yifei was like a newlywed couple about to bow to the heavens and the earth. After today, the news about Guhan and Liuyan Ling would definitely spread across the 8 Bay cities. From word of mouth, people would definitely know that the heir of the Liuyan family was with Guhan, a young talent from Yuzhong City. This young talent was very powerful and had the number 1 sword, the Sky-Reliant sword, as the sword lady. His swordsmanship was superb and he was an excellent sword master. He was a perfect match for Liuyan Ling. Who would know that there was another Song Yifei in Yuzhong City? How could Song Yifei not be sad when he saw this? How could he not want to cry? My dear friend, your heart is crying. All of a sudden, Song Yifei heard a voice from his purple palace. It was the Netherworld Iris sword. It was talking to Song Yifei through the sword mark. Of course I'm going to cry, Song Yifei said bitterly. I can only cry. What else can I do? Amitba. My dear friend, the sea of emotions knows no bounds. Repent before it's too late. The Prajna sword also advised. But I don't want to turn back. I don't want to turn back. If I turn back once, I won't be able to look forward anymore. I won't give up. I won't give up. Song Yifei closed his eyes. His voice was filled with determination. But my dear friend, compared to that woman from the Liuyan family, you're really... The Netherworld Iris sword seemed to be unable to continue. It could only sigh. How am I compared? Song Yifei sneered with tears in his eyes. His expression was strange and cold. My talent is also top-notch. My innate sword essence can also become a sword bearer. If I were born in a family like Liu Ling, do you think I would be inferior to Liu Ling? Ba, my dear friend, there's already a demon in your heart. You should quickly turn back. The Prajna sword sighed. I said that I won't turn back. Song Yifei clenched his teeth. Why should I turn back and not Liu Ling? My dear friend, since the two of you aren't willing to turn back, then the only path you can take is to surpass the other party. The Netherworld Iris sword said indifferently. I have a path full of thorns and twists. I wonder if my dear friend is willing to take this path? Ba, I'm leaving. Otherwise, these old bones of mine won't be able to hold on much longer. Haotian Jiendi finally ended his conversation with Liu Ling. Maintaining the gigantic hand consumed a lot of energy. It would be a great burden for Jiendi if he used it for too long. Haotian Jiendi suddenly said to Gohan, Gohan and the people of Yuzhong City, return to Yanjing City with Ling after we leave the trial array. This. Gohan refused. Your Majesty, I heard that Fort Yeyang has been conquered by Yuan Ko. Yuzhong City is in need of strength now. How can I go to Yanjing City? You still don't know, but the entire Yuzhong City is surrounded by Yuan Ko. I'm afraid it'll be difficult for you to return to Yuzhong City. It's that old man Baiju who ordered you to return to Yanjing City with the team from Yanjing City. I'm just passing on his message. Haotian Jiendi said in a low voice, Fine, I've already passed on my message. You can decide what to do next. With that, Haotian Jiendi's gigantic hand dissipated instantly. The oppressive aura also disappeared along with the gigantic hand. According to the trial array, Haotian Jiendi had really left. Gohan, Grandpa Haotian is right. I think you should come back with us. Liu Ling was about to persuade Gohan to return to Yanjing City with her. However, when she turned her head, she realized that Gohan, who had been by her side just a moment ago, had disappeared. In an empty room in the trial array, the space was suddenly torn open. Gohan jumped out of the torn space. He had come here to solve the last remaining problems. Gohan controlled the trial array and searched the entire space. Finally, he found his target in a corner. With a thought, the space was torn open. A white cat seemed to be caught by something and was thrown out from the other side of the space crack. After a while, a sickly husky and a lifeless black bear were also thrown out. The three Egyptian gods once again gathered in front of Gohan. Chapter 440. Congratulations, my lord. Congratulations, meow. Meow. Badet was a cat, after all. She was the smartest and had the fastest reaction. She straightened up and bowed to Gohan. Congratulations, my lord, on successfully taking over the entire trial formation, meow. Badet congratulates my lord, meow. Seeing that she had been moved to this place by Gohan, Badet knew that Gohan had already taken control of the entire trial formation, and their agreement with shrouding the heavens Jiendi was finally about to be fulfilled. How could this Egyptian god, who had been trapped for more than 700 years, not be excited? Well, I have to thank you too, Badet. Without your reminder, I wouldn't have been able to defeat this idiot and master the yin-yang swordsmanship. Gohan glared at Ice Eyes, who was lying on the ground pretending to be dead. Stop pretending. I know you're still alive, Ice Eyes. Didn't you want to kill me just now? I'm here now. You can do it now. Ice Eyes did not speak. It seemed that she planned to play dead until the end. It was not up to Ice Eyes to play dead. The entire trial formation was now under Gohan's control. With just a thought, Gohan could make Ice Eyes beg for death. How would Ice Eyes dare to act tough in front of Gohan? She could only hope that playing dead would appease Gohan. This was like being called to the office by the class teacher. The best thing to do was to lower your head and keep silent. If you continue to play this game with me, I'll feed the divinity to this husky right now. Seeing that Ice still did not speak, Gohan used his ultimate move. Sure enough, after hearing Gohan's words, the bear that was pretending to be dead finally got up from the ground. What do you want? At most, you can take my life away, Ice said very shamelessly. It seems that your spirit has recovered. You know how to be afraid of me. Gohan sneered. Compared to Ice's previous anger, Ice now had awe and fear in her bones. The anger that had been controlling her seemed to have disappeared. What proved this even more was that Gohan discovered that Ice's strength was no longer at the meteor rank. She was now on the same level as Batet and Anubis. She was also at the soul rank level of Yuan Ko. The reason why Ice was able to break through Sky covering Jiandi's restriction and break through to the meteor rank was because of that inexplicable anger. Now that the meteor rank power had disappeared, Ice naturally lost that strange emotion. Who's afraid of you? Isis tried to maintain her dignity, but in fact, she had already started to give in to Gohan. She tried to shift the blame. But I was really strange before. I wanted to kill you for no reason. It's not my fault. I should have been controlled by someone. Do you know who controlled you? Gohan asked again. Or did you come into contact with something before your emotions changed? No, I became like that when I woke up from hibernation. Ice shook her head. It seemed that she would not be able to get anything out of her. She was also confused. And you, Anubis, have your injuries not healed yet? The husky that was called out by Gohan stood up and stuck out his tongue. He then raised one of his legs. A blood-red wound was clearly visible, and blood was still flowing out of the wound. The power that injured Anubis is very strange. There seems to be a mysterious power attached to his wounds. This power has completely prevented Anubis' wounds from healing. If we still had our original strength, we could have easily gotten rid of that power. But now that we have lost our divinity, there is nothing we can do about this wound. Anubis can only rely on constantly producing new blood to replenish the blood lost from the wound. Otherwise, Anubis would have died of blood loss. The power that can't heal the wound? Gohan vaguely remembered where he had seen such power, but unfortunately, he could not recall it for a while. Let me take a look at your wound. Gohan grabbed Anubis's leg and pulled it in front of him. His finger touched the wound lightly. Suddenly, Gohan felt a tingling sensation on his finger. It was like the feeling of popping candy bouncing in his mouth. Then, something miraculous happened. The wound that had been unable to heal began to heal rapidly under the touch of Gohan's fingers. In less than 5 seconds, the wound that had tormented Anubis for nearly a month had completely healed. Woof woof woof. Thank you, Your Majesty Gohan. Woof woof woof. Anubis, the husky, returned to his normal self the moment his wound healed. He jumped up from the ground and jumped around wildly in celebration of his new life. Unfortunately, there was no toilet paper around. Otherwise, he would have torn a few rolls of toilet paper to celebrate his new life. Call me Lord Gohan, you idiot. Batet, the white cat, jumped onto the husky's head and kicked the husky's nose hard. Gohan did not pay any attention to these two guys who were playing around with each other. He used his spiritual sense to check the meridians and Zifu of his body, and after discovering that there was no abnormality in his body, he opened his eyes in doubt. When Anubis' wound was healing, Gohan felt something enter his body through the husky's wound. But no matter how he searched, he did not find anything unusual. He hoped that Gohan was wrong. Stop messing around. I summoned you here because there is something I need to deal with. Gohan clapped his hands. After I took control of the entire trial array, I learned a lot about it. Back then, Jetian Jiandi did have an agreement with you. Now you can leave this place. You are free. As soon as Gohan finished speaking, a spatial door opened in the room. On the other side of the door was a world of birds, flowers, and lush trees. It was a world of freedom. We are free? Bastet's voice trembled. After waiting for more than 700 years, this moment had finally come. Old cat? Are we really free? Is he not going to hold me accountable? Isai's eyes were also filled with tears. She thought that Gohan would punish her harshly, and then make things difficult for them. Perhaps he would never fulfill his promise to set them free. She did not expect Gohan to be so straightforward. She was so touched and excited. Woof, woof, woof! Anubis expressed his joy in his usual way. The other side of the door is the other side of Chongyang Mountain. You can leave this place through this door. The trial array will no longer restrict you. I will not violate His Majesty Zhetian's promise to you. You are really free, Gohan said solemnly. Actually, Gohan was not lying. He was telling the truth. The other side of the door was indeed a world of freedom. The trial array would no longer restrict them. As long as they left this place, they would no longer have anything to do with Gohan. Hearing this, Gohan felt a bit stupid. These three Yuanhuas had the foundation of universe-level Yuanhuas, and were the most useful subordinates in this trial formation. The other memory fragments were one-time use items. Only these three Yuanhuas could be used repeatedly. It went without saying that they would be a great help to Gohan in the future. And right now, Yuzhong City was in a huge crisis. These three universe-level Yuanhuas might be able to turn the tide and save the entire Yuzhong City from this disaster. No matter how he thought about it, Gohan shouldn't really let them go. It was too much of a loss. Of course, Gohan wasn't that stupid. Or rather, these three Yuan-Kos weren't that stupid. After a short moment of excitement, Bast was the first to realize that something was wrong. Master Gohan, shouldn't you remove the seal on our godheads? Batet had a flattering smile on his face. This was really difficult for him. As a cat, it was such a difficult thing to make his face show a flattering expression. Godheads. Gohan smiled evilly. P.S. Damn, when I use the word evilly, I feel like I'm even more devilish. What godheads? Naturally, it's our godheads. His Majesty sealed them when we were locked in the training formation. Please help us remove them as well. Oh, you're talking about that. Gohan continued to smile evilly. Then, he decisively refused. No, I can't remove the seal on your godhead. What? Upon hearing Gohan's words, Isis almost jumped up from the ground. If you don't remove the seal on us, then we'll be damned Soul Realm Yuan-Ko for the rest of our lives. If we meet one or two trash sword-bearers or Yuan-Ko, we'll be killed. We'll just be sending ourselves to our deaths if we go out. What does that have to do with me? Gohan looked at the three animals with disdain. I'm a human and you're Yuan-Kos. We're natural enemies. How can I let three universe realm Yuan-Kos go out? So that you can continue killing sword-bearers. If it weren't for the fact that you've served His Majesty Shroud Heaven for so long and that you have an agreement with His Majesty, I'd kill you right now. A Soul Realm Yuan-Ko is still a Yuan-Ko. Who knows, there might be ancient Sword Realm sword-bearers who die in your hands. It's better to kill them all as soon as possible. Woof woof! The husky began to jump again. It seemed that whether it was angry or excited, it always jumped around to express its inner feelings. Was this dog easy to figure out or hard to figure out? Mr. Gohan, you said that we have an agreement with His Majesty Shroud Heaven. Are you going to go against our agreement and trample on His Majesty Shroud Heaven's reputation? Bast was helpless. Everything was in other people's hands, and the only thing they could make Gohan worry about was the agreement with Shroud Heaven Gyendi. Of course, I respect His Majesty Shroud Heaven's decision. Gohan smiled evilly and snapped his fingers. A thick stack of white paper filled with words the size of a fly floated down from the sky. Look, this is the agreement you signed with His Majesty Shroud Heaven to guard the trial formation. His Majesty has kept it in a room. It's been 700 years, and it's still in good condition. Looking at the contract in front of them, the three gods of Egypt looked like they had seen a ghost. Guhan had actually found this contract, or rather, I Ching had actually left this contract here. If they had known this would happen, they would have found this contract and destroyed it instead of doing anything else in the past 700 years. Chapter 441. Why is this contract still here? Didn't you search the entire trial formation and not find it? Bast complained to Ice Eyes. After they had been imprisoned in the trial formation, Bast and the other two had looked for the contract once. In the end, they had found nothing, so they had thought that the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor had taken the contract away and had not hidden it in the trial formation. It's my fault. Why don't you say it's Anubis's fault? He's a dog. What does it have to do with me if his nose can't smell anything? Ice Eyes snorted and then threw the blame on Anubis. Big sister, please. He's a husky. Can you count on a husky's nose? Bast said painfully. Ice Eyes was instantly speechless. You can count on anything in this world, but don't count on a husky. Okay, you've said enough. Guhan threw the contract in front of Ice Eyes and the other two. The agreement about your release of freedom is in Article 111. Article 111 says that when Guhan takes control of the trial formation, he will return to the three gods, Ice Eyes, Bast, and Anubis, absolute freedom. They are not allowed to go back on their word, hunt, arrange ambushes, and so on. He must ensure that these three gods can live as they please. Unless these three gods are stained with human blood again, Guhan and Guhan's men, relatives, friends, and all related people are not allowed to hurt them. Guhan said concisely. In fact, the provisions were very strict. Article 111 alone used more than 500 words to describe it. It was to ensure that Guhan would give Bast and the other two absolute freedom according to the treaty. That's right. Bast plucked up his courage and said, Isn't sealing our divinity restricting our absolute freedom? Absolute freedom also includes our divinity. Okay, do you think I'm careless and didn't read all the clauses clearly? There's also Article 132 here. This is the treaty about lifting the seal on your divinity, Guhan said with a sneer. Upon hearing Guhan mention Article 132, Bast's last hope that Guhan was careless and did not read all the clauses was shattered. Rule 132 says that if you want to remove the seals on your godhoods, you must take the initiative to help and maintain the trial formation. When Guhan enters the training formation, you must immediately appear in front of Guhan and explain the rules of the training formation in detail. You must also secretly protect Guhan and not let him get hurt in the training formation. You must also control the pace and make sure that Guhan is always in the lead. Bast and the other two were required to do a lot of things. There were more than 30 things in total. Basically, it was a cheat for Guhan. Guhan looked at it and thought, good heavens, if Bast and the other two did all of these things, Guhan would have successfully reached the top on the first day of entering the trial dungeon. How do you know that we didn't do these things? Bast was still quibbling. These are all done in secret. Of course, we are helping Lord Guhan in secret. Lord Guhan, aren't you the first person to enter the finishing line? Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Bast did not help Guhan at all. At most, he ran over to Guhan and explained the ins and outs of the matter to Guhan when he was defeated by Ice Eyes. Other than that, he did not do anything. At the very least, he did not do the first requirement of explaining the rules of the trial formation at the beginning. Well, these are all done in secret. Guhan sneered and glossed over this condition. No problem, he still had the 135th condition, the one that Bast could not refute. The 135th condition requires you to defend the finishing line. However, you are not allowed to stop Guhan from entering the finishing line. You can only stop other sword-bearers from approaching the finishing line. Guhan threw the contract on the ground. Ice Eyes, what were you doing at that time? Bast could not refute this condition. This was also the reason why he gave up on doing the 132nd condition. With Ice Eyes blocking his path like a lunatic, he was destined to be unable to remove the seal on his godhood. What was the point of fawning over Gohan? Batet instantly went limp and could no longer muster any strength. He was almost a useless cat now. All right, the facts are very clear. According to the contract between you and I Ching, there is no need for me to remove the seal on your godhood. You can leave now and enjoy your life of freedom after 700 years. Gohan gestured for Bast and the other two to leave. Woof woof. Anubis looked at Bast with incomparable sorrow. It had to be said that a husky's expression was very pitiful when it was sad. Even Ice Eyes looked at Bast pitifully. They were all hoping that Bast, the smartest among them, would be able to find a way to remove the seal on their godhood. Just tell us, my lord. What do you want us to do in order for you to remove the seal on our godhood? Bast looked at Gohan with an ashen face. He suddenly understood. Gohan must have wanted to discuss some conditions with them. That was why he put out this contract. If Gohan really didn't want to remove the seal on their godhood, why would he go through all this trouble, gathering them together, taking out the contract and saying so much nonsense? Gohan had also read out the entire contract. Given his understanding of Gohan's character, Gohan would never waste time on such things. He definitely had something up his sleeve. Alright, since you can see it, I won't keep you in suspense. I can remove the seal on your godhood, but you have to help me fight and become my helper. Help me just like how you helped Zhetianjiendi back then. Gohan finally revealed his purpose. Then, like Zhetianjiendi, you want to trick us into staying in this damned trial formation for 700 years? Bast had more or less guessed what Gohan wanted. These three unlucky fellows, other than their abilities, did not have anything else that Gohan coveted. No, I can sign a new contract with you. When I become an immortal sword wielder, the contract will automatically end. I must give you absolute freedom and remove the seal on your godhood, Gohan said calmly. Gohan said indifferently, if you really understand me, then you should also know that I am a person who keeps my words. Even if you are Yuan Ko, I will still keep my promise. However, after you get your freedom, you must join the Free City and become an absolutely neutral free person. If you are willing, we can sign the contract now. If not, you can leave. We need to discuss this. After Bast said that, he pulled Ice Eyes and Anubis to the side and began to discuss in a low voice. Although it was a discussion between the three gods, Anubis did not participate at all. He just kept barking. The ones who were really arguing were Bast and Ice Eyes. Ice Eyes wanted to leave immediately. She had had enough of being a subordinate of humans. More importantly, she had been trapped for 700 years. Therefore, Ice Eyes was determined to leave. Even if she could only be a soul rank Yuan Ko, it was better than continuing to be a dog of humans. Woof, woof, woof. Upon hearing Ice Eye's words, Anubis replied. Ice Eye's face was as disgusted as if she had eaten dog poop. Guess what Anubis said? Ice Eyes, I don't want to persuade you. If you are really willing to be a soul rank Yuan Ko and abandon your godhood forever, I can only bless you. Bast's attitude was also very firm. He was willing to believe in Gohan once and become his subordinate. When Gohan became an immortal sword bearer, he would be free. As for whether Gohan could become an immortal sword bearer, neither Bast nor Ice Eyes had any doubts. After all, their relationship with Gohan was far from as simple as Gohan knew. Are you going to separate from me? Ice Eyes almost jumped when she heard Bast say this. Didn't the three of us agree to never separate in this world? Then bear with it. Bear with it for another 10 years. Bear with it until Gohan becomes an immortal sword bearer. Bast said through gritted teeth. Don't forget how old Gohan was when we first saw him. Maybe we can get our godhood back in less than 10 years. 700 years have passed. Can't you even get through 10 years? At the very least, we can live outside for 10 years. It's just that we have to be restrained by Gohan. It's not like we haven't been under Gohan's control before. It's not a big deal. Probably because Bast's words had an effect, Ice Eyes fell silent. She thought for a long time. As a former god, it was more painful for them to give up the godhood that symbolized the glory of the gods to be a small soul rank Yuan Ko. Therefore, Ice Eyes finally agreed. As for Anubis, he was just a husky. She did not need to care about what he thought. It seems like you have an idea. Gohan smiled, then took out a pen and paper. He wrote a contract on the spot and handed it to Bast. Bast read the entire contract very carefully. Compared to I Ching's contract, which had more than 140 clauses and 50 pages, Gohan's contract was very simple. From the moment the contract was signed, Bast, Ice Eyes, and Anubis became Gohan's subordinate. They would listen to Gohan's orders, carry out the tasks assigned by Gohan, and protect Gohan's life. Without Gohan's permission, the three of them were not allowed to leave a 20-kilometer radius around Gohan. Without Gohan's permission, they were not allowed to show their true strength. Usually, they had to appear in the form of animals. Gohan was not allowed to insult the reputation and dignity of Bast, Ice Eyes, and Anubis. He was not allowed to order them to do anything that would damage their dignity. If a human sword-bearer or Yuan Ko attacked them, they had the right to fight back. However, they could only knock out the human sword-bearer. They were not allowed to kill them. Yuan Ko did not have this restriction. Gohan could not let them do tasks that would lead to certain death, or tasks that were beyond their ability. As long as they obeyed orders, Gohan could not interfere with their daily lives. He had to provide them with accommodation, food, bathing, holidays, mating, and other rights that animals naturally enjoyed. The contract lasted until the day Gohan became a sword-bearer at the level of a fairy sword. When Gohan became a sword-bearer at the level of a fairy sword, the contract would automatically end. Gohan had to completely remove the seal on their godhoods and give them freedom. However, they could not join Yuan Ko's camp. Instead, they had to join the Freedom Metropolis. In the future, they were not allowed to actively attack humans or kill humans. Otherwise, Gohan would hunt them down. All in all, this was a contract that was very considerate of Bast and the other two. At the very least, they were given the greatest respect for their dignity. This made Bast and the other two heave a sigh of relief. Finally, they made a cut on their claws and used their own blood to paint their claws red. Finally, they imprinted it on the contract. This was probably the funniest contract in history. Other than Gohan's own name, there were only 3 red paw prints of different sizes. It was as if his own pet had accidentally pressed on it. Chapter 442. Where did you go? How come I can't see you? When Gohan reappeared in the hall, Liu Ling came up to him. Gohan, who was just beside her, disappeared in the blink of an eye. Liu Ling was so scared that she thought it was Long Shi Jiandi who had secretly captured Gohan. The heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor left behind his last words. He asked me to be in charge of the operation of the entire trial formation so that more sword-bearers could come here to train in the future. After all, you can fight with a real Yuan Shin here. Sword Maiden Online can't compare to this. Gohan said. The main purpose of the trial formation was to preserve the things that Zhetian Jiandi had given to Gohan. When Gohan took everything away, only the trial formation was left. Originally, Gohan could have completely sealed off the trial formation and turned it into his own secret base. However, that would be too selfish. After thinking for a while, Gohan decided to open the trial formation to the public. It would be used to improve the fighting ability of sword-bearers. After all, the survival of the human race was the most important thing. Moreover, opening the trial formation would not affect Gohan's normal use of the other functions of the trial formation. So I went to the main control room of the trial formation to set up the rules. In the future, not only sword-bearers, but also ancient sword-bearers can enter the trial formation. This way, the gate of the trial formation will remain open for a long time. Gohan said. That's great. With this trial formation, the strength of the younger generation of humans will increase a lot. His Majesty Shroud Heaven shouldn't have used such a great place earlier. If it had been in operation for the past 700 years, our human race might have been a few times stronger. Fleeting Time Ling sighed. She did not doubt Gohan's words at all. Well, it would be great if that's the case. Gohan nodded his head. He had managed to cover up his disappearance. But when Gohan looked around, he was furious to find that Song Yifei, Yi Wenjun, and Ku Rakin, the three sword-bearers of Yuzhong City, were surrounded by others. Both sides pulled out their swords and looked like they were about to fight. If they really fought, Song Yifei and Yi Wenjun would probably be in trouble, except for Ku Rakin. Stop! Do you think there's no one in Yuzhong City? Gohan yelled and jumped to Song Yifei's side, holding his sword in front of them. Seeing Gohan's sudden appearance, everyone unconsciously took a step back, intimidated by Gohan's imposing manner. There was nothing they could do about it. The battle between Gohan and Durandar was just too shocking. They knew that even if there were 10 of them, they would still not be Gohan's opponent, causing them to secretly feel a trace of awe towards Gohan. What? Do you want this king's sword from me too? When Gohan saw these people's expressions, he thought that they wanted to snatch his Dharch sword. He questioned them sternly on the spot. Even the sword Dharch did not manage to snatch it from his hands. How could he be afraid of these people? If you want the king's sword, take it from me. What kind of sword-bearer are you to bully my friend? No, Comrade Gohan, I think you misunderstood. We have no intention of snatching your king's sword. Messi, the Gemini star of Buenos Aires, stepped forward and said, Comrade Gohan, you should also know that the purpose of so many of us coming here is not to obtain this king's sword, but to bathe in the sword radiance when the king's sword is born and improve our affinity with the sword lady. It's just that you suddenly disappeared just now, Comrade Gohan. All of us thought that you ran away with the king's sword, so we had no choice but to invite these comrades from Yuzhong City to have a chat with us and visit Comrade Gohan's house in the future. Hearing Messi's words, Gohan's anger subsided a lot. Putting himself in their shoes, the people here had wasted a lot of time in the trial array for the sake of this sword gleam. When they saw Gohan suddenly disappear, they would naturally feel like they had lost both their lives and their wealth. It was normal for them to surround Yuzhong City and demand an explanation. On the contrary, it was Gohan who had done something wrong. Is that so? Ling. Gohan turned his head to look at Liunian Ling. Liunian Ling smiled bitterly and nodded. Gohan knew that this was indeed the case. I'm sorry, I just went to the main control room of the trial array. Gohan repeated what he had said to Liunian Ling, and the sword-bearers immediately felt relieved. It turned out that this person was in a hurry to work for the welfare of the other sword-bearers. We were all wrong about him. As a result, the atmosphere on the scene eased up a lot. Messi also took the opportunity to say, Comrade Gohan, since the misunderstanding has been resolved, shouldn't you let us bathe in the king's sword's sword radiance together? We don't want to stay here for another minute. That's naturally not a problem, but... When everyone heard the word, but that came out of Gohan's mouth, they thought that Gohan was going to play some tricks again. Their hearts were in their throat. It's just that I don't know much about the king's sword, so I'm not sure what the sword radiance is all about. Gohan was telling the truth. There were very few records on the internet about the sword radiance when the king's sword was awakened. It only said that when the sword radiance appeared, it could increase the success rate of synchronization of the sword-bearers. As for the specific situation, there was no mention of a word. So you don't know about this? Messi heaved a sigh of relief and explained, when the new king's sword touches the first human sword essence, it will trigger the sword radiance. There hasn't been a new king's sword for hundreds of years, and there's no information about it on the internet. Only the king's sword family knows about it. Is that so? Gohan controlled his sword essence and touched the king's sword in his hand. Then, in an instant, the king's sword emitted a dazzling golden light that blinded everyone's eyes. However, the magical thing was that such a bright light did not hurt their eyes at all. Instead, it touched everyone's heart with a sense of tranquility and warmth. However, under the cover of the golden light, they could not see their surroundings clearly. In the golden light, there was a faint roar of a dragon and a tiger. When the golden light dissipated, their vision was restored. Everyone felt that their bodies were a little different, but no one could tell what was different about them. Is this the sword radiance? Messi lowered his head and muttered to himself. Although he knew about the sword radiance from his family's ancient books, there had not been a new emperor's sword for hundreds of years after all. He was also at a loss as to what the sword radiance was like. It was not until the sword radiance shone on his body that he realized that what the ancient books had said was true. His innate talent had really been improved. Good sister. Let's go back to Buenos Aires immediately. Messi hugged his sister, Marin, excitedly. I have a feeling that I can finally synchronize with Yuan. Really, brother? Marin was also very excited when she heard her brother say that. Both she and her brother had surpassed the limit of 10,000 quarks of sword essence. They could become sword bearers at the famed sword level. However, her brother could not synchronize with the sword maiden that they wanted. That was why he had been stuck at the treasured sword level. Now that Messi suddenly said that he could succeed, how could Marin not be excited? That's right. I've always had a feeling that the connection between me and Yuan is just a little bit away. Now that this little bit has been filled by the sword radiance, I can definitely synchronize with Yuan this time. Messi was getting more excited as he spoke. He suddenly grabbed Gohan's arm. Comrade Gohan, since you can control this trial formation, how do we leave this place now? You just have to shout that you will send me away. Gohan laughed. Send me out. Messi shouted without hesitation, and then disappeared from the hall. You're so annoying. Wait for me, brother. Marin pouted and followed Messi out of the trial formation. Seeing that their leader had left, the sword-bearers of Buenos Aires could only smile wryly and follow them out of the place one by one. When they heard Messi's words, some of the sword-bearers who also had more than 10,000 quarks of sword essence could not help but want to return to their sword tower base city to synchronize with the sword maidens that they wanted. As a result, the sword-bearers from other cities also left the hall one after another. Soon, only the sword-bearers from Yuzhong City and Yanjing City were left here. Gohan, all of you come back to Yanjing City with us. Grandpa Haotian just said that your sword immortals also want you to go to Yanjing City for shelter. Liuyan Ling said to Gohan. She really wanted Gohan to go back to Yanjing City with her, but she knew very well that Gohan would not go with her. Sure enough, Gohan shook his head very firmly. Yuzhong City is the place where I was born and raised. Without Yuzhong City, there would be no Gohan today. Now that Yuzhong City is in trouble, how can I leave? At least you have a conscience. Ku Rakin sneered. I don't want to see you being unreasonable. I'm leaving first. See you in Yuzhong City. With that, Ku Rakin disappeared from the hall. He had already left the trial formation. This guy. Gohan shook his head and pushed Yi Wenjun and Song Yifei in front of Liuyan Ling. Please take them to Yanjing City. What do you mean, Gohan? Don't you think I was born and raised in Yuzhong City? What right do you have to make decisions for me? Song Yifei said with a grimace. He was obviously very dissatisfied with Gohan's actions. Mr. Gohan, Wenjun is the descendant of Zhetian Jiendi. Yuzhong City is the root of our Yi family. Yi Wenjun can't just run away like this. Yi Wenjun also said very sincerely. This was not a melodramatic drama. Gohan did not try to force them to be safe. Gohan patted their shoulders. Okay, let's go back together. Chapter 443. So, we'll walk back to Yuzhang City? Outside Chongyang Mountain, Song Yifei pouted as he looked at the boundless forest. When they left the trial array, they realized that the eagle cat sword spirit, who was supposed to bring them along, had already left. Naturally, the hover bus they took to get here was gone as well. They were trapped on Chongyang Mountain just like that. The cheapest single-person hover bus cost 50,000 hero coins. Guhan and Song Yifei were new sword-bearers, so how could they have 50,000 hero coins? As for Yi Wenjun, although he had been a sword-bearer for many years, he had spent almost all of his hero coins to maintain the heaven-shrouding family's expenses and his own cultivation. How could he have the money to buy a hover bus? It was very likely that Gu Luren had his own hover car, but unfortunately, he had left the trial array one step earlier than Gu Han. At this moment, Gu Luren was nowhere to be found. He had probably driven his own hover car and left. The sword-bearers from other cities had their own means of transportation, but they all had to return to their respective cities, so there was no possibility of passing by Yuzhang City on the way. So, it seemed that the only way Gu Han could go home was to walk back to the city. This was an impossible task, not to mention the fact that they might encounter all kinds of powerful Yuan Ko along the way. Even if Guhan and the others had a smooth journey and did not encounter any enemies, it would take them at least half a year to get back on foot. When Guhan first left the trial formation, he was busy arranging for the Egyptian deity trio. When he returned to the temporary camp, he did not know that the eagle cat sword spirit had already left. At that time, there was only one hover bus left in the temporary camp. If he had known, he would have asked Liuyan Ling to borrow a transportation. Why don't we follow them to Yanjing City first? Once we reach Yanjing City, we'll think of a way to get back to Yuzhang City, Song Yifei suggested. At that time, the only hover bus that had not left was the one from Yanjing City. Once the people from Yanjing City left, Guhan would really be trapped in Chongyang Mountain. That's the only way. Guhan smiled bitterly and nodded. Things were just so funny. He had just rejected Liuyan Ling's request to return to Yuzhang City, but now he had to follow her to Yanjing City because of the lack of transportation. What was going on? In fact, it wasn't that Gu Han didn't have any other way. The three new deity underlings could come in handy. Isai's giant bear was much faster than any hovercraft when it ran at full speed. If he rode on Isai's back, he would definitely be able to return to Yuzhang City very quickly. Unfortunately, it was clearly stated in the contract that he couldn't do anything that insulted the dignity of Isis. For a deity, using them as mounts was definitely a shameful thing. Moreover, Guhan was not alone. Song Yifei and Yi Wenjun were by his side. It was impossible for Guhan to leave them behind. Mr. Guhan, have we decided to follow them to Yanjing City? Yi Wenjun suddenly interrupted with a bitter smile. If that's the case, we'd better hurry up. I see that everyone in Yanjing City has already boarded the hovercraft. They're about to leave. Guhan looked up and saw that the door of the hovercraft had indeed closed. The engine was roaring, and it had begun to accelerate slightly, ready to leave. Wait. Everyone in Yanjing City, please wait. When Gu Han saw this scene, he couldn't care less about his cold demeanor anymore. He immediately shouted loudly, hoping that Yanjing City's hover bus would stop. Gu Han was sure that his voice was loud enough for the driver of the hover bus to hear. Because the hovercraft needed to monitor the surrounding environment during its journey, any small sound would not be detected by the hovercraft's sound collection system. Therefore, the driver of the hovercraft must have heard Guhan talking to them. However, the driver turned a deaf ear to Guhan's words. Instead, he stepped on the accelerator, accelerated, and directly rushed out. In the blink of an eye, only a graceful figure was left, gradually disappearing into the horizon. What's going on? Have we been abandoned? Yi Wenjun saw the hovercraft of Yanjing City disappear into the distance, completely dumbfounded. Not only was Yi Wenjun a little dumbfounded, but even Gohan was a little dumbfounded. Did they really have to walk back to Yuzhong City? What are you guys doing here? Suddenly, a girl in white rushed out of the forest and smiled at the three dumbfounded people in Yuzhong City. Miss Ling, why are you still here? Didn't you board the hovercraft and leave together? Seeing Ling appear, Yi Wenjun's face was full of surprise. Great. Others might not have a hovercraft, but Miss Ling definitely had one. Now they were saved, and they didn't have to walk back to Yuzhong City. When I found out that the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit left first, I guessed that you fools would not be able to return to Yuzhong City. Liuyan Ling walked in front of Gohan proudly. How about it? I guessed it right. Yes. Gohan was a little embarrassed. Although this time the blame was not on him, he had indeed miscalculated a step. Linlin, that's enough. Stop teasing Gohan. Since you're here, you must have a way to get us out of here, right? Song Yifei enthusiastically hugged Liuyan Ling's arm, looking like a normal close friend. In the past few days in the training array, Liuyan Ling and Song Yifei had indeed become close friends. She did not doubt Song Yifei's actions. Then, Liuyan Ling laughed and said, "Hee, this is something I bought with 3 years of red packet money. After so long, it can finally be put to use." As she spoke, Liuyan Ling released a hovercraft from her dimensional pocket. This hovercraft's exterior was perfectly streamlined, and its body was deliberately designed to be slender. There was even a majestic dragon head carved on the front of the car. Overall, rather than calling it a hovercraft, it was more appropriate to call it a dragon. This is this year's latest Yen Huang 3008. Seeing this hovercraft, Yi Wenjun's eyes instantly emitted tens of thousands of volts as she stared at this majestic and domineering hovercraft. What's a Yen Huang 3008? Compared to Yi Wenjun's infatuated expression, Song Yifei was very calm, or perhaps a little confused. She had little interest in hovercraft, and naturally did not know much about them. This is this year's latest hovercraft from Yen Huang Heavy Industry. It uses the top-of-the-line 3-phase pressurized suspension turbine engine and can reach a maximum speed of 1,800 km per hour. It will only take an hour to fly directly from here to Yuzhong City, but that's not important. What's important is this unique design. Yen Huang Heavy Industry invited Grandmaster Gongsun to personally design its appearance. Just this appearance alone cost Yen Huang Heavy Industry millions of hero coins. There are only 30 of them sold in the 8 major cities, and once they're sold, they'll be gone. This is really too precious. I didn't expect to see the real thing. I'm so lucky. Following that, Yi Wenjun went on and on about how valuable this Yen Huang 3008 was, how good it was, and how much it was worth collecting. As she spoke, Liuyan Ling's face lit up, and her impression of Yi Wenjun increased significantly. Although Song Yifei was also full of smiles as she listened to Yi Wenjun talk about the Yen Huang 3008, only she knew how bitter her heart was. Ignoring Song Yifei and Yi Wenjun's feelings, Gohan did not listen to Yi Wenjun's explanation. Instead, he circled the Yen Huang 3008 and asked a constructive question. Ling, why do I feel like this car can only seat 2 people? Gohan realized that although this Yen Huang 3008 looked quite long, its width was frighteningly narrow. It was only about 1 meter wide. This width was similar to that of a motorcycle, and a person could only maintain a sitting position inside. It was impossible to even lie down. Of course the Yen Huang 3008 can only seat 2 people. Yi Wenjun rushed to answer. In order to pursue extreme speed, we have to reduce the air resistance of this car as much as possible. It is precisely because of this unprecedented design that the Yen Huang 3008 can reduce the air resistance to a record-breaking level. This is really an extremely great design. I don't care how great this design is, I only have one question. If this car can only seat 2 people, then what about the other 2? There's 4 of us. This. Yuanjun was speechless. This was indeed a question that she could not answer. Everything about the Yan Huang 3008 was good, except that the driving space was too small. It was clearly a car, but the people it could carry could not even compare to a motorcycle. If we squeeze in at the back, we can seat 2 people. Regarding Gohan's question, Liuyan Ling seemed to be prepared. She already had a card up her sleeve and spoke with assurance. The actual space at the back was about 0.8 meters. If 2 people squeezed together, they could indeed squeeze in, but it would definitely be very uncomfortable for the 2 people in the back. Then what about the other person? Gohan asked again. The driver's seat definitely cannot be squeezed, so where is the space for the other person? And here. Liuyan Ling walked to the back of the Yan Huang 3008 and opened the back cover, revealing a space that was 1 meter long and 1 meter wide. This space can even fit 1 person in? How about it? Any more questions? This car actually has a trunk. Seeing the appearance of this space, Gohan was shocked. Having lived for so long, Gohan had never heard of a hovercraft with a trunk that was an antique design from 1,000 years ago. Ever since humans invented the dimensional pocket, the trunk had completely lost its use. With something as convenient as the dimensional pocket, the trunk was undoubtedly an extremely useless design. Therefore, ever since the invention of the hovercraft, there had not been a single hovercraft equipped with a trunk. The space saved was used to improve the user's riding experience, or to optimize the layout of the vehicle. In short, the trunk had completely disappeared from all forms of transportation. This is the true greatness of the Yan Huang 3008. Seeing the trunk, Yuanjun was actually moved to tears. This is a type of sentiment. Do you understand sentiment? Before the apocalypse, there was a famous saying, "Those who sell their hammers are inferior to those who sell their emotions." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.